team, and then you're going to hear from the project and team lead for BRT, Ryan Knowles, today on the alternative delivery. Next. So Ryan will walk you through the project overview and the goals, the project status of Federal Boulevard BRT, delivery selection process, delivery method recommendation, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to Ryan.
Thank you, Jessica. Next. So as Jessica mentioned, my name is Ryan Knowles. I'm the Bus Rapid Transit Program Manager for CDOT Region 1. We live in the Traffic and Safety Division and are led by Angie Drum, the Deputy Director of Traffic and Safety. We started the Federal Boulevard BRT project in late 2023 and have made really good progress over the past 2 years on this project. As an overview, it is an 18-mile long bus rapid transit project from North Westminster at 120th Avenue to South Denver at Dartmouth Avenue. The project scope includes 74 individual BRT stations with elevated near-level boarding platforms, sidewalks, curb ramps, some roadway reconstruction in parts of the corridor, as well as signal work, utility relocation, and then bus lane striping and signing. The overall cost for the 18 miles is roughly $318 million. This includes the design costs as well as right-of-way and construction. And we've been working very closely with our project partners, primarily the Regional Transportation District, also the City and County of Denver, cities of Federal Heights, Westminster, Adams County, and the Denver Regional Council of Governments. Next. Our goals for the project are to improve safety along that 18-mile corridor. Federal Boulevard is on the Vision Zero high injury network and has a disproportionate number of serious injury and fatal crashes. And so that's an important factor. Also through our engagement, we've heard about the importance of safety and security at transit stops and on the buses. And so we're working that into the design of the project. The project intends to increase transit reliability and ridership with the intent to decrease transit travel times, making transit competitive with driving. Along this corridor, we are promoting cultural vibrancy and quality of life issues. It's a very diverse corridor over that 18 miles. And so we're working very closely with the communities and neighborhoods along the corridor to improve those areas through this project. We're also focused on transit accessibility, primarily through the BRT components like the platforms that I mentioned, as well as improving connectivity and mobility. So ensuring that transfers between transit routes are efficient and effective, and also connecting to bicycle and pedestrian networks throughout those 18 miles. Next. This previous summer, we completed our 30% design milestone, and we will be releasing an RFP for final design in the first quarter of this year. We're also close to completing our NEPA review and evaluation and expect our document to be signed spring of this year, and we're expecting it to be a categorical exclusion. We've also been working with the Federal Transit Administration to hopefully secure a $150 million small starts grant through their capital investment grant program. We recently received news of our project rating, which is the evaluation defined by federal law that these projects need to go through. We received a medium high rating. And so in order to proceed in the process, you need to get a medium or better. So that was a good result. We also have in our 10-year plan, $150 million dedicated to this project in fiscal years 2027 and beyond. And we're working to potentially bring NAPME funds and other programmatic funds into the project with the goal to start construction in late 2027 and to use whatever available funding we have at that time to begin the construction phase. And so that was an important factor in our CMGC recommendation. Next slide. So we evaluated design, bid, build, and CMGC for potential delivery vehicles. I won't spend a lot of time talking about the differences because we covered it last month, but we did evaluate the project in terms of complexity and innovation, delivery schedule, level of design, cost considerations, project risks, And then we included some secondary factors in our selection matrix as well. Next slide. We evaluated that criteria against our delivery goals, which are to achieve BRT revenue service by January 2030, in line with the greenhouse gas planning standard that we are mandated to meet. Prioritize safety and connectivity for all modes before, during, and after the construction phase. Coordinate with local businesses to mitigate construction impacts. Maximize safety for workers and the public during construction, and also maximize the project scope and the improvements with the available budget we have when we start construction. Next slide. This slide shows the results of our PDSM. And so as you can see, design, bid build, and CMGC were found to be appropriate methods for delivering this project. Design build less so. However, the CMGC method edged out design bid build primarily because of the delivery schedule criteria that we weighed it against. Next slide. This schedule shows the variety of milestones that we need to complete in order to get to revenue operations and BRT service by 2030. And so as I mentioned, the prevailing factor in the selection of CMGC was mitigating schedule risks so that we could meet revenue service by 2030. Additionally, the CMGC method allows us to adjust packaging and construction phasing with the available budget that we have at the time of construction, which the other methods do not. And finally, CMGC allows us for collaborative risk allocation across the different packages that we may develop with the construction manager. And so that's important because it'll allow us to begin parts of the project that are ready for construction while other pieces that may be taking longer are continue to be developed and worked out. Next slide. We held a public meeting for the industry on December 17th of last year, and we shared a lot of the information I just covered with the industry. We had over 30 participants at that meeting and recommended the CMGC delivery vehicle. We heard no major concerns or objections from those who were at the meeting, and we also had a Google form open until December 23rd. We also did not receive any comments through that. We did have a few questions about the timing of the PDSM and how it related to our evaluation of design build, the procurement schedule for the construction manager, and then phasing priorities for developing packages or advancing parts of the corridor before others. And so we had some good discussion about that. Happy to answer any questions you may have regarding those questions. Our next steps, so we continue to advance CMGC. We intend to begin the procurement process if we have approval from this commission on this method. Next slide. We would start the RFP process for the construction manager this spring, alongside an RFP process for an owner's representative. And then prior to that, we intend to advertise for final design. We're hoping to have that advertised probably early next month at this point. And then finally, we intend to start construction on the Federal Boulevard BRT project in late 2027, with the BRT open to the public in 2030. Next slide. And I thank you for your time today, and we'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ryan and Jessica. Any questions for these folks about the alternative delivery method? It's on our agenda tomorrow. We'll hear more about the project itself later today. Sounds good. Thank you both. Okay, now we'll go into the next workshop, which is a joint workshop with the CTIO Board of Directors, and the discussion is of the 10-year plan. So we have a number of presenters today. I believe that Director Liu wanted to kick things off. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking this one early on, because I think it's an important part of our conversation, and it's good that the presentation that we'll run over is the most important one. I think as we go into the discussion of the Front Range portion of the 10-year plan, start with a quote from the former Deputy Secretary of Transportation when I worked there. He used to reinforce over and over, you start things other people finish and you finish things other people started. So the part of the process that we're entering into today is actually kind of part two in some ways of a process that happened 5-6 years ago. The first of its kind, really so successful that it became codified in law in many respects as a more transparent way for the Department of Transportation to do business. What this plan has then are the culmination of projects that have been underway for years, as well as new ones. And because of the way our budget rolls into one iteration versus the other, you necessarily have a combination of projects that are partially done, projects that were in the planning phase the last time, and projects that are able to absorb new capacity in the budget. Fortunately, we're done with more than half of the projects that we started last time. The vast majority of the rural road resurfacing projects, the sort of shorter, simpler ones, are done and so far into use that they probably have potholes already. But the bigger projects, like all big projects, have time to go. So, virtually every large project that is being carried into the plan is one that has roots in the last iteration of the 10-year plan. You have projects like 270 that were funded at the time, but because it's a multi-year project, are still nearing construction now. There are others that have been kind of planned in parts of the planning process, but were not in the 10-year plan. And the I-25 projects, the segments, well, there are actually both. There are segments that are about to be under construction that Heather and Jessica and team have been working on for years, but there are also segments that would be new to the plan. So I think understanding that none of these are new and all of them have been iterated to some extent already is an important sort of starting point for this part of the discussion. Much more so than the rural road projects, which tend to be smaller and, by virtue of being, $5, $10, $20 million projects and not, $800 million projects, get done faster. In terms of the kind of parallel stages of these processes, right? We have a lot of process, both on the planning side, on the engineering side, on the execution side, and these sort of have to run in parallel in order to get any big project done, right? We can't, do it one step and then another, or we'd never do anything. We have to be doing all of them concurrently. So, at the same time as we are talking about the funding of these projects in the context of updating and eventually codifying the new 10-year plan, NEPA is ongoing for many of these projects. Design is happening. Parts like the immediate bridge replacement needs on 270, are hopefully ready to get a shovel in the ground as soon as the record of decision is complete. And, that all has to happen, kind of not in sequence, but concurrently. I think I want to, before I turn it over to the team, touch a little bit on some of the extent of the hard work that particularly in this part of the discussion, regions 1, 2, and 4 have been doing. And just to vouch that we have the best of the best working on all of these big projects. I can't say enough good things about the work that Heather's team has done, kind of very efficiently taking a sequence of a big project in chunks one at a time, and being able to kind of differentiate between the pieces that are planned and the pieces that are in execution without missing a hitch, right? They've been able to kind of work through decision points, but also get things under construction as soon as those decisions are made. And, in a similar vein, on Jessica's team, we pulled out the A team for 270, especially because it was so hard. We begged David to take on the management of this project because he's incredible and has done fantastic work on other projects. And, just seeing how he presented to the community at the public hearing that I was also in attendance at last night was just an example of why you put the best people you have on really hard projects. The modeling behind all of these is hard, and another of my favorite adages is all models are wrong, some models are useful. You have public comment process to be able to talk about what we can get better, but the things that they're doing in all of these projects are very sophisticated modeling parameters that allow you to look at different factors, whether it's traffic needs, induced demand, or otherwise, and be able to kind of have a conversation about how the pros and cons and different variables interface with one another. So, I'm happy to talk to anybody about what's underlying, the ways that they're looking at these projects. And certainly, there are ways to look at them differently. We can have those conversations, but I just want to sort of put a little weight on the extent of good work that the team has done, and to, provide my assurance that I have a lot of confidence in the people doing this work, and think that we have good and collaborative group, tackling hard things in the best way that we can. So with that, I will turn it over to the team. I think Jessica is starting, or Darius. Darius, Jessica, Heather, everybody. Shane is flying under the radar because, he's not in the hot seat today. Thanks.
November.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Liu. Appreciate your time today. We're finishing up the presentations that we started in November with Regions 3 and 4, and talking about Regions 1, 2, and 4 projects today. If we want to go to the next slide, which takes a look at our completion schedule, we're in the January segment of this. We'll have a report out on the GHG report a little bit later today, but today's presentation is going to be focusing on some highlighted projects from those 3 regions. But we also do have I think it says a link in your packet, all 167 projects that are taking a look in this region. So from what we heard in the, based off of the subcommittee recommendation, is some more description of the projects. And so we put those together so you're able to take a look at the breadth and depth of the projects that are being proposed in the next 10-year plan, with not only some of the larger ones, but all of the different ones that are expanding out, not throughout the Front Range, but also the Eastern Plains as well. So if we go to the next slide, this just goes through the agenda. I'm going to turn it over to the RTDs to kind of go through their project highlights, starting with Region 1, and then I'll finish up the presentation talking about the 10-year plan as a whole, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps towards the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Mickelbust, Region 1 Regional Transportation Director. Jessica.
Hello again. Next slide. I think these are yours.
Oh,
But I'll
my
take it later.
apologies. My apologies. One last slide from me. I think we've already described this, but there's another attachment in the packet that goes through the definitions on what some of the topics mean as far as the in the fact sheet. So, but I think we've talked about the fact sheets a little bit earlier. So my apologies about that. If we go to the next slide, it should say Region 1. There we go. Okay, Jessica.
Hello again. All right, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today talking about the Region 1 plan, and just want to start out by giving a really big thank you to the Region 1 team. A lot of them are sitting behind me, both planning and engineering. They're the minds behind all of the numbers, the projects, the phasing, the sequencing, the QA, QC on all the things that we've put together. So I want to really give them a big, huge thanks pulling this plan together and working with Darius's team as well. It's a big lift. Next slide. So Region 1 has 8 counties, 4,100 lane miles, and a population of 3 million people. We also have the lion's share of crashes and fatalities in Region 1, and we are not done growing. Every interstate in the state touches Region 1, and therefore, generally, our projects are larger in scope, scale, and complexity. Region 1 has a lot of projects to talk about, and it was really hard to pick which ones to bring forward today, but I'm excited about the list that we have. Many of those projects that I'm going to touch on specifically today are those that are in the years, which we're considering years 27 to 31 timeframe. Just some high-level notes of our 10-year plan. We do have 31 proposed projects for the next 10-year plan. 5 of those projects are new, and if you have the purple colorful sheet from Darius, those are located on the bottom under new projects. 3 current projects in the current plan we propose to remove, and I'll list those because they're not listed on the new sheet. Those are State Highway 30, widening in Arapahoe County, removal of the C-470 Morrison Bridge, which was a future capacity for express lanes, and removal of the Bellevue I-25 interchange project. Total in Region 1, we have about $275 million of proposed strategic fund allocations for fiscal years 21 through 30, and about 515 anticipated strategic fund allocations for years 2031 to 2036. I do always remind our local stakeholders and commissioners, you don't have to be on the plan, on the 10-year plan, to be a project. Some of these projects that we're removing will continue to make progress with the local agencies and stakeholders, and CDOT will provide support as appropriate, but they just won't be receiving strategic funding from CDOT. Next. All right, you just heard a lot from Ryan, and originally when we put this presentation together, we weren't sure that Federal Boulevard was going to come with the CMGC, so I'll touch on this one really quickly. So as Ryan mentioned, Federal Boulevard, it has been in the 10-year plan since 2022, but we had it as a generic line item. So it was just listed as region-wide BRT. If you look at the new plan, we have now specified and broken that single line item out into 2 line items, Federal BRT and Colorado BRT, which I'll talk about later. So that is one difference that you'll note. We felt like that really provided a transparency of where the dollars are being allocated for each of those BRT corridors. So as Ryan mentioned, Federal BRT will provide enhanced bus service for about 18 miles along Federal. It is the street that runs out in front of headquarters here. It's currently served by the RTD bus route 30, which runs every 60 minutes, and the bus route 31 by RTD, which runs about every 10 minutes. Proposed BRT will operate in dedicated lanes for about 13 miles of the corridor and 5 lanes in mixed traffic. Between Westminster Station and Evans, the bus will come about every 7.5 minutes. The BRT North route will be about 15 minutes, and then the BRT South route will be about 15 minutes. Potential funding sources, as Ryan mentioned, we're enthusiastically awaiting the decision of the Federal Transit Administration CIG Small Starts. We did get a medium-high rating, which is phenomenal for a BRT project. So we're hopeful, fingers crossed, that we'll be successful. We'll keep you all posted as we hear. And I'm going to move on to the next project. All right, so setting the stage here a little bit, because the I-25 corridor is so large and so complex, it spans several regions. I'm going to present the first couple slides, and then I'll be kicking it over to Paul DeRocher with Division of Transit and Rail to really talk about the success of the bus. But Heather and I both felt like it would be really helpful to give a little bit of background and context for the I-25 corridor, given the length, size, and complexity. So you'll see that the project spans both Region 1 and Region 4. In 2001, an environmental impact statement was initiated, so about 2 decades ago, with a record of decision in 2011. The limits of that environmental impact statement covered north of Union Station to Wellington and west to U-87 and US 85. Subsequent to the record of the decision, many improvements have been made along the I-25 corridor, but several still remain. I'll note the corridor still remains a very high priority of all the stakeholders in I-25 North corridors. So if you look at the graphic on the screen, the gray area to the left of the map, you'll see segments starting with 2 through 9. And next to those segment numbers, you'll see those areas where the express lane is either complete, proposed, or active construction. Since we've completed this segment slightly asynchronously, that's why we wanted to help provide this graphic and really give a bit of a background. So today you'll hear about segment 2 from Region 1 that has been subsequently broken into segment 2A and 2B. I'll talk about both of those. And I'll also talk about segment 3. Segment 4 will be touched on by Region 4 Heather. Segment 5 is under construction, and segments 6 through 9 are completed. Segment 1, we don't talk about that one a lot, but segment 1 was constructed when the EIS was initiated, and that is currently the reversible express lane that you see on I-25 today. And it was built with the US 36 express lane improvements from Denver to Boulder. Segment 1 is now under the purview of plenary concessionaire of US 36. So that segment 1, you won't hear much about it, but in case you were wondering, it still is out there today. Next slide. So we've been really excited with the busting performance on the I-25 corridor, and so we did want to highlight that as part of the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul DeRocher to touch on busting on I-25.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Just to kind of make a brief cameo here for a couple of slides. So busting, really, I think what we're really talking about is the success of busting. And I think we've come to the commission, we've talked about that success quite a bit, but really tying it to the express lanes. So I think one important note to make here is that any new projects on I-25 are going to be predicated on fully funding busting mainline services and maintaining it at the expanded levels of service that were achieved through SB 22-180. So I think that's an important point to make just right off the top. But kind of picking up on the theme of the busting successes, and of course, since 2015, when busting was launched, we experienced the global pandemic where all transit agencies achieved and really experienced some pretty significant impacts to their ridership. Despite that, we have been able to see a 245% increase on this service. So the investments that we've made both in service and in infrastructure have really paid off. In addition to that, we've seen a lot of private investment around the mobility hubs that we'll talk about on the next slide in up and down the I-25 corridor. The North Line in particular, and for those of you who have ridden that service, you know how important it is for the success of that service to the infrastructure investments that we've made as a state. We actually see the North Line having a 31% operating expense fare box recovery. So just comparative to other fare box recoveries around the nation, the North Line is the cream of the crop. And so it's really something that we as a state are something that we are very proud of. And then lastly, using transit, and I think transit that has the benefit of its own infrastructure via the express lanes, travel time reliability. So you leave from your origin and get to your destination, you know reliably you are going to get there within about a half an hour of time if we're looking at, for example, leaving from the Firestone Longmont Mobility Hub to getting to downtown. And that really compares very favorably to driving alone, particularly in the general purpose lanes that has a greater degree of travel time variability. And so this is something that commuters really think about when they're thinking about how they're going to take their trip for that day. So if you go to the next slide, we're focused here on the investments that we've made in those mobility hubs. So the mobility hubs, as you can kind of see here in the map, all up and down I-25 in various stages of completion. So we have a few completed, particularly in that north area of I-25, a couple that are under construction that you can see here, and several that are in that planning or that planning stage. And so for these mobility hubs, this is really a national model. Again, something that the state of Colorado has, something that we are leading in that is really establishing a model where the interstate system serves as what I call busting rapid transit. And I think it's one that I think other states, and we have the opportunity to really lead, and we've had those conversations with other states about how they can replicate this. But kind of picking up on Shoshana's initial comments, busting was started in 2015, but over the last 7 years, these investments have really been something that has been that is paying off, right? So we are continuing the success that our predecessors have established, and then really making those investments on the I-25 corridor. So segments 2A, 2B, and 4 will continue that trend into the future. So I'll pass it back to you, Jessica.
Thanks so much. Okay, now that we've given you a little history and context of the I-25 corridor, we are going to deep dive into the segment 2A, which is on the southern end of the corridor. So segment 2A on I-25 extends from US 36 to 104th Avenue. We do have about 270 million anticipated total cost. The project has been on the 10-year plan since 2020 and has been identified as a priority for the stakeholders since the early 2000s. The project is currently undergoing an environmental assessment. So as we discuss this project, we are looking at various alternatives, but we generally have an idea of what we think some proposed alternatives could look like. Generally on this corridor, we have a major safety concern, both northbound and southbound. Crashes on the corridor occur almost daily, and the proposed alternative that we've come forward with has a potential crash reduction of about 46% or more. On average, there are about 2.7 crashes per day on just this 5-mile segment. And for those of you who are watching the news or driving the corridor on December 28th, after Christmas, I-25 was closed twice for several hours, once in the northbound in the AM direction, and then it was closed again in the southbound direction for several hours. So it's really impactful when crashes occur in this part of I-25 and the corridor is closed. As it stands, we're looking to replace the alternatives that we're looking at to replace fare-rated 88th Avenue bridges, which will include a new bikeway and expanded sidewalks on both sides, additions of a general purpose lane, both northbound and southbound. These lanes provide space for drivers to safely merge onto I-25 without disrupting mainline traffic flow, and provide trucks ample space to accelerate and merge safely from I-76 to 104th Avenue. The project also proposes standard and adequate shoulders for emergency responders and for breakdown vehicles. We have had a fatality or two with someone trying to change a tire on the shoulder or just trying to respond to crashes. We are looking at replacing several culverts and doing some other improvements along the corridor to make this a much safer section of I-25. Next. Moving to the north, I-25 segment 2B from 104th Avenue to 120th Avenue. We're currently anticipating this would be about an $85 million improvement. Segment 2B is new to the 10-year plan, as Director Liu mentioned. We currently do have this portion of I-25 in the out years of the plan. But again, this segment is not new to the local communities and stakeholders. They've been asking for improvements for over 2 decades. Segment 2B currently has substandard shoulders that require improvements for safety and operational efficiency, as well as safe access for enforcement and first responders. Given that the project is in conceptual design very early, about 15%, we've included a template in the 10-year plan, but we have a conservative cost estimate that could cover improvements up to shoulders, potentially general purpose lanes, merge lanes, a new pedestrian overpass at 104th by Cinzetti's. The current one is starting to lose its useful life. And as the project moves through design, the alternatives and solutions will be further defined. Next. Still traveling north on I-25 to segment 3B. This segment goes from E470 to CO7. We're anticipating a potential cost of about $315 million. That is based on what we call FIR level design, which is about 30% design. So not crayon design anymore. We've got lines on paper and some levels of impacts. I-25 segment 3B is new to the plan, and it is proposed in the out years. Again, it's not new to the local communities as a priority. I-25 segment 3A is complete from 120th Avenue to E470, but 3B extends from E470 to CO7 and includes the full interchange build-out at CO7 and I-25. Once that interchange is constructed, it will provide regional and local transit connections from Boulder to Brighton and Fort Collins to Denver, as CO7 is seen as a major hub, and there are some proposed BRT corridors on Colorado 7 as well. As I mentioned, this portion of I-25 is about 30% level design, so our cost estimate for the plan is based on that. The cost estimate also includes some cemetery right-of-way that's currently not being utilized. We're hopeful to potentially look at acquiring that before it's utilized, and a major utility transmission line relocation. If you've driven that portion of I-25, you've seen the large transmission line present. Next slide. All right, a project most of you have been hearing about for several months from the community and is again mentioned several times today, the I-270 corridor. This project is currently listed in the plan for $900.8 million. I-270 was in the original 2020 plan as one line item. The current proposal is to break out the project into various elements to show the project and have budget transparency. So if you're looking at the old purple colorful sheet and you look at the new one, we've broken it out into several line items, critical bridges, Highway 224, Phase 1, Phase 2. So what we really want to do is provide transparency to the public on where the bucket of the $900 million is being allocated and hopefully provide all of you transparency to that as well. As I mentioned, you've heard a lot about this project. It's currently undergoing an environmental impact statement. Public hearings are literally occurring last night, and we have our last virtual one. So thank you to those in the room who've been attending. Those require a lot of effort, and we really appreciate your time if you've come to the meetings. As proposed, the preferred alternative is the replacement of the corridor's most structurally and operationally deficient bridges, addressing key structural deficiencies and supporting future phases by advancing mainline segments to the selected preferred alternative footprint. So bridges included in Critical Bridges Package Phase 1, which is on the plan, are the eastbound and westbound I-270 bridges over the South Platte River, the Burlington Ditch, Brighton Boulevard, Union Pacific Railroad, BNSF, and the East 60th Avenue, BNSF. It's not unusual that our professional maintainers are responding to holes in the decks on this corridor, both putting, a safety risk for professional maintainers and the public and just shutting the corridor down for long periods of time. So replacing these structures is really high priority. The mainline roadway that will be reconstructed to full width within Phase 1 will include the two segments between the South Platte River bridges and the Burlington Ditch bridges, and between the Brighton Boulevard, Union Pacific Railroad, BNSF bridges, and the 60th Avenue bridges. Phase 2 is the full replacement of the remaining bridges and the roadway infrastructure along the I-270 mainline that was not completed in Phase 1. Phase 2 also includes the complete reconstruction of Vasquez Boulevard, which is an antiquated cloverleaf interchange. It's very hard to navigate, and we have regular crashes and tip overs of commercial motor vehicles at that particular interchange. We will also do the intelligent transportation system infrastructure and the I-76 ramp improvements. Future phases, completion of non-mainline scope elements such as full roadway reconstruction, improvements of Sand Creek Drive between Quebec and 56th, Vasquez over Sand Creek Drive bridge replacement, a pedestrian overpass at Leiden Park as requested by the community, and other associated project elements that do not directly impact the I-270 mainline. Overlay projects will include ADA ramps and lighting, along with interconnected cables, continuous sidewalks, new pedestrian bridges, storm drainage, and signal in place replacement. So overall, a very large construction project. Next. All right, the North Stadium safety access improvements. This is a really fun project. As most of you are aware, the Broncos Stadium is moving to a new location, to a property at Burnham Yard, not located. You can actually see it from our headquarter windows kind of down to the southeast. So this is in the in-years of the plan. It is a new line item. It is an adjusted line item from our prior 10-year plan, where there was a $30 million line item sitting for I-25 safety and operational improvements. So it's not a new line, it's just a kind of a renamed and redirected funding line for a very similar area. As part of the infrastructure improvements for the stadium, the proposal for the 10-year plan is to keep that $30 million dedicated to improvements along the north side of the stadium, which you can kind of see on the map there. While other roadways will need to be upgraded and improved as part of construction of the stadium, many of those are under jurisdiction of the city and county of Denver, such as 6th Avenue and 8th Avenue. And several of those are also covered by the recently voter-approved bond that Denver just passed. CDOT has jurisdiction over Colfax Highway 40, located on the northern side of the stadium site. So while we don't know the exact improvements that we're looking to build or exactly what type of NEPA we'll be doing, We are working closely with City and County of Denver and the Stadium District on a design and traffic and mobility study that will further define and talk about what we are going to construct. However, I do want to note that the state is, the $30 million is our max that we are contributing to the stadium area. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, go Broncos, beat the Bills. Next. All right, so a little bit smaller scale, but of real big importance. Some of these are our tiny but mighty things on our transportation system that you may or may not notice as you drive around. I'm hopeful that the next time you pull onto a ramp, you'll notice one of our ramp meters and you'll think, gosh, these are 1980s technology, very antiquated. So this project aims to modernize our aging ramp meters. Those are the kind of lights you pull up to at a ramp and they sometimes are turned on and will signal red or green for you to move forward into the flow of traffic. We really need to modernize this system. As I mentioned, a lot of them are from 1980 and the computer technology behind them is just old and outdated. So we are looking at replacing the critical components of those, the detection equipment of the ramp meters. So what do ramp meters do? They reduce congestion, they minimize delays, and they enhance overall safety of the corridor, and they contribute to more efficient traffic operations within the region. So this project is really critical for us to get out there and fix our roads. And last slide, thank you. I mentioned earlier, Colorado Boulevard BRT. We did break out, this is not a new line item in the 10-year plan. It is an item that is broken out from the region-wide BRT. Federal BRT is the other one we talked about earlier. So BRT has been in the plan since 2022, and currently Colorado BRT is in the out years, so 31 plus for funding. It's currently undergoing Federal Transit Administration alternatives analysis, which we call AA. And we have yet to determine the alternative that we're moving ahead with. So the plan and the cost kind of assume what we think could happen, but we are still evaluating and getting input on these center or side running alternatives. We do have public engagement underway. Currently, RTD does serve Colorado Boulevard with Route 40. It operates 7 days a week with a frequency on Monday through Friday every 15 minutes and Saturdays and Sundays every 30 minutes. So what we'd be looking to do with the BRT project is improve the efficiency and regularity of that bus service along the corridor. We have not applied for FTA funding as part of this corridor. That's something we'll evaluate once we understand the ridership and the alternatives that we propose. And those are the ones that we highlighted for today. Realizing out of the 31, I only highlighted a handful. So if you have questions on any others in the plan, we're opening up the floor for questions.
We had the whole packet. We had the whole project list within our packet. Darius, did you have some?
I think we wanted to give a pause before we move on to Region 4 for questions for
course.
Region 1 projects.
And before I do that, I wanted to say I had the chance to go to the 270 public hearing and hear the testimony on Saturday, and I saw on display the kind of work that you talked about, Director Liu. I mean, I'm really impressed with all that goes into these. It becomes more evident in those public hearings, but I know it's always happening behind the scenes. So thank you all for what you do. Okay, any questions for Jessica? Yeah, Commissioner Ritter, go ahead. Commissioner, if you could just
Paul, you began by indicating that any improvements on I-25 were contingent upon funding of Bustang. That sort of puts a Damoclean sword over this commission, doesn't it? You know, because I got to figure there's, according to your chart, there was about 150,000 people that use Bustang, and there's probably, didn't put it up there, about 2 or 3 million that use I-25. I'm trying to get a sense of how that balances with the directive that unless we fund Bustang, there's nothing to improve I-25. What's the rationale on that?
Director Liu?
Can I borrow the mic?
Yeah.
I'll spare Paul that one. I think one of the things, look, there, one of the challenges that we have to balance in finalizing this plan is how we align capacity projects with making sure that we're making sufficient commitments to multimodal to justify them. Right? That's been, a sort of needle that we've threaded carefully in the governor's administration throughout. And, it's one where I think we've made a lot of progress. There aren't a lot of interstate highways like I-25 out there in the country where the interstate artery itself has been sort of used to hardwire transit with the type of investments that we've made in the network of mobility hubs or otherwise, right? I-70 is one of the unique transit services in the country that actually increased service in the year after COVID, right? That was like unheard of at that time. So I think the fact that we see this sort of pent up demand for more transit on the interstates and the data from the last few years has proven that if we add it, they come, I think justifies why we sort of make these two tied together. The investments that we're making in the mobility hubs are not going to entirely bear fruit tomorrow because a lot of those anchor future transit-oriented development, right? Like the work that Heather and team have done with the developers at Centerra Loveland is not going to change demand patterns tomorrow. It's going to take maybe 5, 10, 15 years to bear fruit. And we need to make sure that once we're making those kinds of investments, they actually work. So I think tying them together in the context of the plan is sort of reflective of appreciating that we need that transit investment to make good on what we're saying about capacity projects being part of a multimodal arrangement and one where we take the kind of push and pull on induced demand seriously. I think there are many ways that could be met, right? And it's not going to be entirely within the jurisdiction of the commission to talk about all the solutions. We may have to have conversations about legislative adjustments to, toll revenues and how we might be able to utilize some of those to pay for transit. That's obviously a different set of jurisdiction, and the conversations will have to work together. But I think it's sort of putting a pin in the fact that from the administration's perspective, we need that challenge solved in order to be able to sort of fully lend our support to the projects that are proposed in the plan. I think over the next weeks and months, we will move quickly on having those discussions, some in this body, some in the CTIO board separately, and again, potentially some now that the legislative session kicks off. But I think being able to acknowledge that they fit together as a puzzle is something that's important from our perspective. The one other item I would mention in this regard is that, we, and by we, I mean in part me, created a funding gap several years ago on purpose, right? The passage of Senate Bill 180 provided funding for Bustang to increase capacity markedly for a short period of time, but that wasn't funded in perpetuity. Right. It created a bit of a fiscal cliff on the state transit system to be able to prove the case that more transit would be utilized. The good news is it worked. And, I think particularly on I-70, the added service that has gotten to virtually hourly rates, is very popular. The bad news is that unto itself creates a $30 to $40 million deficit moving forward because the SB 180 funds run out, right? That's a good problem to have, but it's a problem that we're committed to solving. I think obviously we would like to see transit grow beyond that, and the conversation shouldn't end with filling the hole that we created, but it needs to start with filling that hole.
Thank you, Director Liu. Go ahead, Commissioner Gutierrez.
So the question I have is, and you may have just answered it. The question I have is, what is the dollar amount that is being asked? What's the ask for Bustang? I mean, is it this 40 million you just talked about? Is it 60? Is it 70? What are we talking about? Because really, when we try to solve this problem, if we don't know what the problem is, it's really tough to say, yeah, we can do this.
I think it's a two-part answer. The whole, call it the SB 180 hole, is, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, between 30 and 40, right? I think we would obviously love to see the service grow after that. And, I think we don't want to constrain the conversation to only fixing a problem we sort of intentionally created to prove that it could succeed. But, that to me feels like the floor of the conversation, if that makes sense.
It does, but that's only a very narrow answer, in my opinion,
Yeah.
because what you're asking is not a one-year problem.
Correct.
This is an ongoing problem. And if we save $30 to $40 million this year, that exponentially, once you start down that road, that grows. Right? I mean, anytime you try to do expansion and all of that. So that's what I've been trying to grapple with in my mind is what are we really looking at for the need long-term?
I think how you define need is dependent on how broad we want to go. We would love to have a conversation about going bigger than that 30 to 40 million. I think the dollars that are available in the system are limited by realities on what, I think all of us are dealing with budgetary pressures that are harder than they were 2-3 years ago, right? It's sort of the reality of the moment we're in. So, if there's a way to have a conversation about more than that, I think it would be, in some ways, the more the better, but I think at least fixing that problem feels like where the conversation starts from my perspective.
And the follow-up to that question is how immediate is this need? Immediate?
Jeff can weigh in with some of the options that we have. I think we could probably find a way to make it work for another year or so, but not much longer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we're looking at ways that we can fill a smaller funding gap in fiscal year 27. I think fiscal year 28 is probably the first year where we have sort of the full price tag on the ongoing funding gap.
Commissioner Marcano?
Thank you, Chair Cook. And I kind of want to piggyback on part of this conversation here, because I think what would be really beneficial for the full commission is maybe a study session or something on the long-term vision for what we want to get out of Bustang. I know that when Bustang first came about, I'll be honest, I was not the biggest believer that this would be like a particularly successful program, and I am very glad that I was wrong. I think we're showing really strong growth and demand for the program. So I think that having a long-range presentation on where we want to take that program, the utility of it, where we think the growth areas are. And I think most importantly, when we're talking about committing money to specific corridors throughout, the state, right? But right now we're focused on R1. How many vehicle miles traveled are we really saving out of the current system and then expanding it into the future, right? So that's part of the state's goals, right? It's VMT reduction, GHG reductions. I want to know what the safety impacts of having these alternatives for people are. And really how many, the adoption rate for breaking from what I would consider by and large a monomodal form of transportation that we have historically funded in Colorado, which is we widen highways, we add, our cities sprawl out, in Aurora's case to Kansas, in Commerce City's case, we're headed up to Nebraska. So there's a lot of, there's a big hole that I feel like we've been digging at the local level, certainly, but also then kind of aiding and abetting that at the state level. So I think Bustang has a huge role to play in reversing that trend. And I would really love to learn more about what the vision is, right? Because I think that would help satisfy Commissioner Gutierrez's question. And I think, frankly, the public should know what the vision is and how this all ties into it. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Other questions, Commissioner Jones?
Thank you. Well, count me as a fan of Bustang and also a fan of making sure that we solve the funding problem as we grapple with the 10-year plan. I guess, Paul, I wanted to go to your slide presentation about how the vision is a national BRT corridor. And that's exciting. And I understand that there's significant travel savings that could be achieved and really provide an affordable, reliable, convenient way for people to travel on that corridor. But I guess I would like to, and maybe this relates to what Commissioner Marcano was talking about, understand what proportion of the ridership could we capture in Bustang ridership along the corridor, and how if we really do want to have that BRT model, we have to do more than have a lane. We actually have to run transit service at a frequency that will allow us to capture that. So what does that look like? What would it take in terms of investment to actually make, the I-25 BRT vision actually look something closer to what we have on US 36 with the frequency of 120 buses a day, maybe going up US 36, something like that. Obviously that's RTD, not Bustang, but the point being, if we're going to do BRT, it's got to be rapid, right? And we're going to invest a lot of money in corridors. The solutions need to be sustainable. We can't just induce more traffic and then need to come back 5 years later with another $1 billion fix. Increasing transit is a way to sustainably reduce congestion for the long term. So I don't know if you have the answer now in terms of what percentage of the users on I-25 would be addressed through the Bustang service, and what potentially could we look at in the future, but love to understand that vision, because I think that's a pretty exciting idea, but like to know the specifics behind it.
And Paul, you're welcome to say, I'll bring that information to you.
Yeah, well, that's basically, I think Commissioner Marcano's suggestion in terms of a future idea, ideating session and on what are the different options that we might have available. So as Director Liu mentioned, the 30 to 40 million is essentially maintaining the existing service levels at that expanded level. So
Is that just on I-25 or is that system-wide?
system-wide. So SB 22-180 funded west, north, and south lines, that service expansion. So on north and south, it essentially doubled from 6 round trips a day to 12 round trips a day. And then on the west line, it tripled it from 5 round trips a day to 15 round trips a day. And so you're asking kind of a question I think that we would need to look at and model. Typically, and I think what SB 22-180 has borne out is that, and certainly US 36 with the Flatiron Flyer service has shown as well, is that as you're adding that infrastructure and increasing service, you're seeing a commensurate response from the public in using that service. And so the question really becomes to what is the ceiling for that? If you're running buses, every minute, what is the response? And so I think that's something that we would look at in maybe some different iterations of what is that service level, and then obviously what are the costs.
We could look at the uptake on US 36 before and after the service got cut and see what the difference is. That might be a model we could look at to understand the efficacy of different frequency.
Could I
Yeah.
just add one brief request
Yeah,
as we look at
I
that?
do want to move on as soon as we can, though, so if you can
Okay.
keep it brief.
Well, just, it would also be useful to look at the relationship between juicing the transit that goes into the mobility hubs that we're investing in on I-25, and how would that impact our ability to increase ridership on I-25 and really maximize the investment of both the investments in the mainline corridor and the hubs?
Okay. I want to make sure that the folks who are here from CTIO have a chance to weigh in with questions. Anybody?
Chair Cook,
Commissioner?
would it be appropriate? I know that CTIO has had discussions since September, when we had our board retreat. And I think it would be beneficial if it's okay with you, for each director maybe to share some of the thoughts that they have shared already within our meetings about the level of support that they feel for expanding, continuing to expand the express lane system, as well as trying to figure out how to support financing, the financing of Bustang. And if that's appropriate, I think it might be beneficial for
Okay.
them.
Let's start with Gina Sacrapanti. Hello.
Without any specific details or the dollars or
really the financial amount, I think I would like to express my commitment that we'd like to find a way to support the initiatives surrounding Bustang and managed lanes. I represent the Pikes Peak region right now. We're trying to figure out where we can support expanded managed lanes. So again, we look forward to future conversations. We are hopeful that CTIO can come along and support these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, Vice Chair Moran.
Thank you. And thank you to Jessica and the team for your presentation on Region 1 projects. Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Director Sakrapanti, sorry, I must have called you Commissioner Sakrapanti, give her a promotion today. Just shared. I think I am encouraged to have this conversation with you all as it relates to the funding for Bustang and just expanded conversations more broadly about how CTIO can be creative in continuing to support efforts that are within Colorado's broader vision of how we continue to move people around the state more sustainably. And so I think, you know, CTIO obviously plays a big role in the managed lane conversation, and I think no one on the board is interested in abandoning that. And I think we are hoping to continue to be supportive of so much of the work that has already gone into these projects. And at the same time, I certainly remain very interested in trying to thread that needle of looking to be creative about how our funds can be used for multimodal projects as well.
Thank you. Director Hart.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'll go ahead and chime in. That's precisely where I'm at. And we've been having this conversation about the various methodologies of trying to fund what these needs are in order to handle capacity issues like Director Lewis indicated, but then also to what degree can we figure out how to best raise more money, not only to do that, but to help with the transit issues. With the concept of literally the questions that are coming out here, if we put money into Bustang or other types of transit, is there a way for us to measure in advance the impact that that's going to have on the congestion issues that we're seeing now and that we know that we're going to continue seeing in the future? And so, frankly, I think that the consensus that I've heard at the CTIO level is, hey, we're interested. We think that there is a pretty critical role for CTIO to help CDOT and frankly the state of Colorado with figuring this out. And so, and frankly, I think it's connected at the hip as we can move more and more people off of the highways and into transit, and we can expand transit where transit makes the most sense. Frankly, I think that's the best way to have the best dollar spent for our limited resources that we have. So basically, I just want to chime in and echo what I've heard from everybody else. That's exactly where I'm at as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have a brand new, as in hours-long, Director Canonico. And I'm not going to put you on the spot unless you want to be there and voice.
Is that working? Okay. I will say I'm very excited to join CTIO and I'm supportive of this. Obviously, I missed the September workshop or retreat, but I'm very supportive of moving this forward too.
Thank you. I'm a director also. I would say I'm also a transit person, and I don't see the managed lanes as merely a multimodal element that justifies the lane capacity expansion. I see them as an integrated whole that are critical to Colorado's future. So I'm obviously on board with that. And by the way, I'm also uneasy with tying them together, if only because I worry that a near-term glitch might compromise a long-term funding. And I'm just trusting you, which I do, to make sure that doesn't happen. So thanks so much. And Chair Cecil, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't think it's any secret that I have been a significant supporter of Bustang and a rider of Bustang, and find that it is an extremely important service. And as a matter of fact, the North Front Range MPO took an action to write a letter of support that I think was supposed to have made it, Herman, to the commission. I haven't seen it here at the commission. I don't know if it got to you. Maybe it hasn't yet. They took action last week, so maybe it hasn't gotten here yet. Enthusiastically supporting CDOT doing what it can to continue the service of Bustang.
We received the letter yesterday.
Okay,
So Didn't have a chance to get into the packet. but
Okay, all right. Well, I knew it was coming and I didn't know when and where it was exactly going. So anyway, there's enthusiastic support at the North Front Range for supporting Bustang in the future. I have been an enthusiastic supporter of continuing Bustang in the future. And I have spent 7 years being an enthusiastic supporter of expanding our express lanes and finishing the system so that it is a well-integrated system throughout the entire state. But this week, I have to say that my enthusiasm tying I-25 North with predicated on Bustang funding tempered my enthusiasm somewhat. And I will say that not knowing what the plan is, and we don't have a plan at this particular point in time, not knowing what the specifics are, I guess where my support is being tempered right now, what I have to say is that my support would be predicated on making sure that there is irrefutable language in whatever document is brought forth that ensures and assures that I-25 project will stay in the 10-year plan, will get funded, and will get built. And the reason I'm being a little adamant about that is you will get tired of hearing me talk about my history with I-25. I-25 has been promised since those of you who've been around long enough to remember the 7-pot strategy. And every time that there is an administration change, the priorities have changed, and that I-25 project, and it's not just I-25, by the way, 270 has an even longer history. So that's why I have that caveat in my support as of this week. So
thank you very much. And Commissioner Hart, please wrap up and we'll.
Yeah, just one other thought, and I'm sure that this is a thought of more people than just me. But my assumption is as we see a more robust growth of Bustang and the utilization of Bustang, which then drives more and more buses utilizing this. And I love the concept's been tossed out here of the interstate BRT kind of a theory, because that's literally what I've been thinking. I think that's what we've all been talking about. My assumption is sooner or later, hopefully sooner in my perspective, that also drives the critical need for passenger rail lines, whether they are light rail within the inner city or whether they're expanded rail outside of the cities. Because as you put more and more buses on the road, it seems like you reach a breaking point where it makes a heck of a lot more sense to put that money into passenger rail lines. And then you have a single mechanical method of moving a whole lot more people than a whole bunch of buses lined up. So I guess I see this as supporting Bustang has headed us down that right road towards those other types of expanded and more efficient methodologies of transit. So just want to toss that up.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any lines or hands online, so I'd like to move on to Region 4. Thank you for waiting. Go ahead.
Yep.
Heather.
All right. I'm Heather Paddock, Region 4 Director. We can go to the next slide. Just going to outline some fun facts of Region 4. We do have 13 counties and 4 TPRs. We do have the most amount of lane miles of any other region, over 6,300 lane miles. We also have the most amount of interstate lane miles. So you will see that reflected in some of the projects that I'm going to highlight today. Northern Colorado is the fastest growing region in the state, and with Weld County being one of the fastest growing counties in the nation. So Region 4 is made up of really a lot of diversity. We have the very urban core areas with those sort of multimodal and transit needs to those suburban areas, definitely a growing community. And then you'll see sort of the rural areas where we've got really low volumes, but 50% trucks, it's heavy ag. I know 9 of those 13 counties are there's 10 counties that produce the highest amount of ag in the state of Colorado. 9 come out of Region 4. So we see a lot of heavy freight in our rural roads, which also puts a lot of wear and tear on our rural roads. So if we can go to the next slide. Actually, I should go back one slide just to note how many projects. We have 53 proposed projects, 21 of those are new, and a lot of those are those smaller rural road, fix it first sort of road resurfacing projects. All right, next slide. So the first project I want to highlight is Colorado 14. We did a safety audit recently because we were getting a lot of complaints, one from the community as well as CSP and the local police officers about the number of fatalities and accidents that we were having in this corridor. If you can imagine a 2-lane rural road that over the course of time has, there has been growth in the area. There is a landfill out in that area. There is agriculture out of that area. And as both Larimer and Weld have grown, this was about a 20-mile stretch of study area that we did. We identified a number of needs. Those needs include adding a left turn pocket, maybe adding a right turn lane, maybe advancing a stopped controlled intersection to a signalized controlled intersection. So the first project is in the North Front Range, and then the second project is in the Upper Front Range. You see investments in both the first 4 years of the plan, 27 through 30, and then money in the out years of the plan, as well as we tend to add some faster safety money to these projects to basically address the safety needs on this corridor. Next slide. This is CO52, another safety project. This is a corridor that we did a PEL study in pre-pandemic, and then we had to update during the pandemic to kind of reflect those numbers and revalidate after the pandemic. 52 ties into 119 in Boulder County, and then stretches across the I-25 corridor into Weld County, crossing through many communities like Erie, Firestone, and Dacono. This is another area. The triangles represents our level of safety service. If it is a red triangle, it's level of safety service 4, which is basically the worst level of safety service, identifying the highest need to address safety, and the orange circle is level of safety service 3. So this project is intended to take a look at those stretches where we are seeing high crash rates and see what we can do to improve those intersections. One of the things that was heavily identified in the PL is this is really an old road that has no multimodal access, so no pedestrian walkways. If they do, they're completely outdated as far as ADA ramps. So as we look at these intersections to improve the operations and the safety, we'll also be tying in those multimodal components to make it more of that multimodal corridor. Next slide. So this is I-76. This is between Keensburg and Roggen. This is about a 10-mile stretch. This is in Weld County as well. This is probably the interstate we hear the single most complaints on, probably second being I-70, which we are actively addressing as we speak today.
But this is a section of road that ironically doesn't show up on the federally poor list, but is 100% low drivability. This is the one that you will say everyone's dentures fall out as they're driving this corridor and everything falls off their trailer. So we are putting a lot of money into this interstate to basically do not a full depth reconstruction, but preserve the life of this corridor and do some significant repairs. Our teams are out there consistently replacing potholes. And this is a high priority for this community to get this interstate back up to snuff. Next slide. This is a county road. Well, not a county road. It's a rural road, CO 59. Looks like a county road, unfortunately. That picture is somewhat reflective of a lot of that stretch. We just recently did a project in the current 10-year plan, replacing about 10 miles of roadway. And we have 2 more projects that we are identifying, one in the next 4 years, and then another one in the out 6 years of the plan. These roads historically never showed up in our surface treatment as a match. So these are roads with really, they're really old because they haven't been replaced in a lot of years. They have really low volume, so they rarely ever rise to the top of the list. Thankfully, through the effort in the rural resurfacing program through the 10-year plan, we can actually address some of these rural roads. And this has been a big, this has made a big impact to the community out here, and they're very excited to see this. And this is a heavy ag road. The wear and tear on these roads, this is 30% trucks. It beats up the life pretty quick of these roads. Next slide. This is another wonderful picture. This is US 287. This is a joint that is a concrete joint that is failing. We've got about $12 million in the next 4 years to evaluate why these joints are failing. We're doing a petrographic forensic analysis of the concrete because the rest of the concrete is in good shape, but the joints are not. And so the intent of this is to identify why these joints are failing, why the slabs are moving. And as you can imagine, this makes for an unsafe condition. This roadway is 48 to 50% freight. And so that jumping and those trailers bumping up and down on these types of joints really creates a safety issue. So that is why we are prioritizing this project. Next slide. This is a project in the city of Loveland. This is US 34 and US 287, but it really is right at the urban core of Loveland. US 287 in this case actually splits, as you can see. And I will say this project is it's modernizing the intersection. The intersection today doesn't safely address pedestrian safety. It doesn't adequately handle the amount of freight that comes through that. So we're going to be improving some turning radiuses, providing some pedestrian refuge through those intersections, upgrading ADA ramps. And then, Loveland, they were one of the cities that rebounded really quick also after the pandemic as far as their transit goes. They have a very successful transit program. And this project is going to incorporate some of those transit stop elements at this intersection. So this is actually going to be a pass-through project, but we are partnering with the city of Loveland to basically help close the funding gap that they need to get this project delivered. Okay, and next slide. And so I know we've talked a lot about I-25. This is the segment in Region 4, ironically, is segment 4. As Jessica mentioned, the EIS started in 2001. This corridor's been studied for a really long time. I'm sure many of you know this, but 90% of Colorado's population live in the Front Range. I-25 is the vital backbone to the Front Range. I always called it the spine or the bloodline to northern Colorado, but honestly, from New Mexico to Wyoming, it is a national defense route. It is a national freight corridor. It is what really connects all of the Front Range from one community to the next. So this project specifically, segment 4, adds an express lane. which is, an identified form of traffic demand management with very high performance, right? It is guaranteed trip reliability. It's very attractive to transit, as we just demonstrated through Bustang. Our express lanes encourage carpooling, and through CTIO's effort in segment 2, they've recently had to measure greenhouse gas reductions and emissions, and they've demonstrated in the peak hour, they've reduced greenhouse gases by 8%, as well as it's an opportunity to be a revenue reinvestment, right? So it's an opportunity to collect revenue. So, the other couple things I want to highlight about the I-25 corridor is what we've seen in the segments that just recently opened, segments 6, 7, and 8. After we opened those express lanes, we've we've collected data every single month. And for 18 months of data, we've seen a 45% reduction in crashes, which is pretty consistent with Jessica's prediction in segment 2 of a 46% crash reduction in crashes. So not only is this a corridor that, this project is going to increase safety, we're confident of that, but it is also going to provide that trip reliability. We have done some estimates that if you were to stay in the general purpose lane from Longmont to Union Station versus if you were to get in that mobility hub on Bustang and go to Union Station, in your peak hour, you could save 30 minutes of travel time. I recently just took that over peak hours and my bus was about 25 minutes late. And that was because we didn't have an express lane yet in segments 4 or 3B. So I think some of those modelings, I'm with Shoshana, all modeling have error, but some of them have proven to be just by my own user experience. So the other thing to note about segment 4 is the section is pretty much built out. Weld County, as the EIS was being built the interstate wide enough for the express lane to be added into the middle. So as far as a cost benefit goes, this is probably the biggest bang for your buck you're going to get. And it's going to be a low cost from an infrastructure standpoint to add an express lane to the I-25 corridor. And I think that is all I have.
Thank you much. Okay, questions. Open it up for questions of Heather Paddock for these projects highlighted or else as otherwise in your packet. Commissioner Gutierrez.
Sorry, Heather, thank you. And I've always appreciated working with you through the years and your thoroughness, and thank you so much. Again, I'm going to talk history. When I first started working on this I-25 corridor as a mayor, the cost to build segment 4 from Highway 66 down to Colorado 7 was estimated at $73 million. In 2019, $127,200,000. And as I'm looking at this chart today, 349 million. So I believe I started working on this in 2011. So from 2011 to 2026 today, from 73 million to 349 million. While Nero fiddles, the highway doesn't get built. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Others? Commissioner Jones.
Yeah, could you explain a little bit more about the crash reduction of 45%, which is obviously very significant and great? Is it just because for at least the first 18 months, we've spread out traffic and is that, or are there specific features associated with the managed lane? What's causing the reduction?
Yeah, that might be one point, but primarily the interstate that in segments 6, 7, and 8 was definitely out of standard. So both horizontal geometry and vertical geometry was not standard. So people were traveling basically at 75 miles an hour on a roadway designed probably for 55 miles an hour. So the fact that we were able to bring up the standard both in the shoulder widths, so we increased the inside shoulder width, which provides opportunity if something were to happen they have room to pivot. We also increased the outside shoulder width, bringing that up to standard as well. I think we have a 12-foot outside shoulder width, which also provides refuge. So when people do have car problems, do get a flat tire, they can actually move over, and it reduces those secondary accidents that we see happen so frequently. So I would say it's both the cross-section of the roadway as well as the geometric improvements that were made.
Thank you. Others? Vice Chair Bowen, please.
Heather, thanks so much. I really was so delighted that so many of your projects are road repair, surfacing, and multimodal. I mean, you really, it was just fun reading that.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's going to be great. I did wonder on, could you talk a little bit more about your reduction in greenhouse gas emissions? You know, and you had 8% in decrease reduction in that. Is that what you were hoping for? Is that over what you were hoping for?
So that is not a projected model. That is just what has been measured to date in segment 2, to my knowledge. So I don't know if you want to speak to that, Piper.
Sure, yeah, happy to provide some context on that statistic. So CTIO is required to produce an annual report, and as part of the new Senate Bill 184 required us to start including reporting on the role express lanes play in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So the 8% statistic actually was across all of our network. So we looked at C470, I-70, US 36, I-25, and we've seen an average reduction of almost 8% during peak periods in the morning and the afternoon. So that is actual data. We worked with Eric Sabina and the modeling team to look at sort of pre and post to come up with that. So that's not from the modeling, it's actual data we're seeing. So we're going to continue to report on that statistic, really to highlight our role in kind of congestion management and improving throughput and reducing idling.
Thanks for that question. Others?
Chair, if I could just add one more comment on that regarding the safety. I mean, I think the other thing is all of the cross streets of I-25 in northern Colorado were very antiquated. They were very aged. They were 2-lane roads with no shoulders, no sidewalks, no multimodal connectivity. So one large part of the I-25 North project was enhancing the east-west mobility and adding sidewalks, bike lanes. The Poudre River Trail is a 40-mile trail that goes from LaPorte to Greeley with a missing gap under I-25. We pulled I-25 out of the floodplain in 2 different locations as well. So in the 2013 flood event, we had to close I-25 because it was overtopped. We pulled that out of the floodplain. So all of those are the safety features, as well as with those interchanges, as I mentioned, that horizontal and vertical geometry, those ramps were insufficient. So people were coming off the roadway at accelerated speeds. They didn't have adequate time to slow down. And so all of those various elements is why we've seen an overall safety improvement on the corridor.
Thanks for that addition. I just wanted to give a pause for the people online. We've got a couple of commissioners online. Any questions from you folks? I don't see any hands, but just in case. Okay.
Commissioner Cook?
Yes.
May I interrupt you one more time?
Sure, go ahead.
The CTIO board is still in session. Our board is still in session. And I believe all of the projects that affect the CTIO board have been discussed at this point. And so I would like to adjourn the meeting of the CTIO board at this particular point in time. And anyone who would like to stay from the board may continue to do so and listen to the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for attending and the flexibility in meeting times and so forth. So, Vice Chair, go ahead.
You know, in reading all this and trying to learn more, I realized that it would be wonderful if we could do have a discussion on road geometry so that we really, so that we really understand. I mean, I kind of understand it, but we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Road Geometry 101. Okay, on to Region 4, Shane Ferguson. Thanks for your patience.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time. My name, again, Shane Ferguson. I'm the Region 2 Region Director for the southeast part of the state. Just a few facts to go over. I have 5 planning areas: Central Front Range, Pikes Peak Area Council, Pueblo Area Council, Southeast and South Central TPRs. We may not have the lane miles that Region 4 has, but we do have 1,000 bridges. We border 3 other states, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Kansas, and we border all 4 regions as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Region 2 is made up of 14 counties, and some of the major facilities we have are I-25, US 24, US 50, US 160, 287, 350, as well as US 285. In our 10-year plan, we're proposing about 78 projects, with 35 being new, with a first 4 years budget about $166 million. Next slide, please. So the first project I'm going to discuss is the I-25 Raton Pass Wildlife Study improvements. And so New Mexico decided to fence I-25 up through their corridor and bordering Colorado with a wildlife fence, and thus has shifted a lot of the wildlife animals up to Colorado's side near Trinidad. And so part of the study is identifying how do we protect our facilities, as well as how do we mitigate and cross our animals across I-25. And so what we're asking for is about $5 million of strategic funds to help fund the improvements from the study, which include fencing. We are also going after grants as they become available for a projected project cost of about $15 million, which would include a culvert wildlife crossing on I-25. This area, again, is near the Trinidad area, recently Fisher's Peak State Park. And we do anticipate a significant reduction in wildlife vehicle collisions, let alone with the fencing alone. So next slide, please. This next project is Pueblo County to the Kansas border to the east. This is a project we've discussed in the past, where we've received a rural grant of about $40.5 million. We're asking for about $5 million of additional strategic funds, as well as other funding within our CDOT budget for a project cost about $72.5 million. This project is passing lanes. It's really safety and fix our roads oriented. We're looking at adding about 12 passing lanes between the Pueblo County line and Kansas border. In addition to that, resurfacing a portion of the approaches to and from the pass lanes in those areas. Next slide, please. The next project is a surface treatment project in Huerfano County. Huerfano County is southern Colorado. I'd say it is essentially north and west of Trinidad area. We're looking at repairs of just the surface treatment itself, as well as rumble strips, some guardrail improvements, striping, bridge preventive maintenance as needed along that corridor. This is really a beautiful highway, a Highway of Legends National Scenic Byway in the area. And so I encourage anyone to get in that part of the state, really take this corridor. It'll take you a couple hours to drive, but it's an incredibly beautiful area. The project cost is around $14.5 million, and we're looking at about $12.5 million as strategic funds to help supplement the funding of this project. Next slide, please. Next project is in the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments area in Colorado Springs. This is their #1 project for the past couple of cycles. It is a $85 million project east of Colorado Springs on US 24, where we are for about a 2-mile stretch. We're going from a 2-lane to a 4-lane section, doing a significant amount of access control to include a new frontage road, drainage improvements, safety improvements, new access points to Rock Island Trail, as well as the Falcon Park and Ride. We're looking at trying to go to advertisement with this project probably in the fall of this year, with potential construction of next year. Again, this is Pikes Peak's #1 project in the area for the strategic plan. Next slide, please. These next 3 slides really kind of tie into the mobility hubs discussion, at least within the Region 2 Southern Colorado area. This slide really discusses the 2 proposed mobility hubs. in Colorado Springs. And this really was born out of the Mountain Metro's long-range plan in Colorado Springs and the improvements that they are looking at, as well as the collaboration with Fort Carson and the Air Force Academy in that area. The Pikes Peak State College as well is very interested in movement of these two mobility hubs moving forward. And the two locations is really at the North Pikes Peak State College campus and then the South Pikes Peak State College campus. The campus has already indicated that both locations, they would donate the land for the new mobility hubs. Currently, the cost for each location has been allocated about $5.25 million. As part of the Mountain Metro long-range plan, they are looking at an express bus that would navigate from the North Mobility Hub to the Downtown Transit Center in Colorado Springs and then south to the South Mobility Hub. Why this is important is on the south end, again, we have Fort Carson, North End Air Force Academy, and there's quite a bit of mobility and traveler commuters from the soldiers or cadets from the north end to the south end and vice versa. Long-range outlook for this area right now, Bustang definitely runs to the Downtown Transit Center. There's a lot of interest for Mountain Metro to continue and utilize these potentially new mobility hubs and possibility of expansion for either Bustang or Outrider in the future, maybe. And so the next project really identifies, next slide, please, the area in Pueblo where there's additional opportunity for connectivity. We're looking at a exit 108 project where the north side of Pueblo, we are reconstructing the interchange. As a part of that project, we're adding a mobility hub, rest area, and freight parking for total estimated cost of about $45 million. If you go to the next slide, just kind of so you show you proximity of some of these areas. Down at the bottom of the slide, you have downtown Pueblo Mobility Hub, downtown Pueblo should be Transit Center. And then at exit 108 is to the north, and then Pikes Peak State College South Mobility Hubs is on the top of the page with Fort Carson adjacent to that. Quite a bit of connectivity from Pueblo West to the 108 area. That's Purcell, essentially a corridor that is heavily utilized by the commuters from Fort Carson to Pueblo West. A significant portion of soldiers live in Pueblo West and take I-25 down to Purcell to get to Pueblo West. Next slide, please. Next project is a safety improvement project in Teller County. Teller County is part of Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments as well as Central Front Range. We're looking at estimated cost of $10 million for an intersection improvement project. And this project at US 24 and Colorado 67 up and divide really addresses a significant crash reduction for adding acceleration deceleration lanes at the intersection. We're estimating a crash reduction potential of 51 to 62%. Currently, the intersection does not have ACL decel lanes associated with that intersection. So we expect a significant improvement in crash reductions in that area, as well as improving sight distant conditions along that corridor, both directions. Next slide, please. Last project to discuss is Colorado 9 up the Hoosier Pass in Fairplay. We're looking at about $16 million for a project, asking for about $8 million of strategic funds to be paired with about $8.5 million within the region. And it really is, it's reconstructing Colorado 9 up to the top of the pass. We will be partnering with Region 3, and Region 3 has a number of projects identified along to the, I guess you'd say, south of the, or north of the pass, and the other side towards Breckenridge to address their side of Colorado 9 and really try to knock out some of the issues on either side of the pass. And so good partnership there. Looking forward to getting that one knocked out. We do know there's quite a bit of sliding of the roadway base, as well as needs for some reconstruction and investigation for some of the geotech issues that we see along that corridor. So with that, I believe that was my last slide for Region 2. I will open it up to questions.
Questions for Shane? Go ahead, Commissioner Hart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of comments. First of all, Shane, thank you for your presentation. I've had the pleasure of working with Shane and his crew for the last 4+ years, and a great group of dedicated professionals really tackling a lot of really difficult challenges throughout Region 2 with limited funds. And so my hat's off to them every time we sit down and talk about a project. But a couple of things that I wanted to point out that are alluded to in these presentations. One of which, Southern Colorado, I don't know for sure if the folks always in the Denver metro area where I grew up are always particularly aware of the possibilities in Southern Colorado. And Southern Colorado has the ability, and we really would like to, help a little bit relieve some of the traffic concerns in the northern part of the state. One of the ways you do that is you improve the efficiencies of the systems that we have in Southern Colorado. And just to identify a couple of those, first of all, is Highway 50. Every time I get a chance to talk about Highway 50 in my previous life as an elected official or here, I want to make sure that everybody knows that a lot of us feel like Highway 50 needs to be 4-laned all the way from Kansas to Utah. And what that would do, it would greatly increase the amount of traffic that could be shifted from northern Colorado to Southern Colorado, and has the added benefit of critically improving the economy of Southern Colorado, which then generates the revenue that we need for all of our transportation needs. And the other roadway that Gary Beatty and I've talked quite a bit about is the northern north-south highway of Highway 287, coming up from southeastern Colorado and then hooking its way back up to the Denver metro area. This is part of the Ports of Plains project. And its purpose is to basically have a clean, efficient methodology for transporting freight in, to, and through our state. Critically important for the state of Colorado. Unfortunately, because of the lower population numbers that we have in southeastern Colorado, sometimes it's a little harder for us to figure out how to get the money to do the various things we need to do. But both of those highways are two very classic kind of things that if we could improve them would help quite a bit. Just wanted to hit real quickly on the Exit 108 project. It's one of my pet projects, and the great thing that Shane and his crew have been able to come up with is tackle two problems that we had and try to come up with a single solution source. We have a intersection that is basically a box culvert that goes under I-25. And that is increasing the amount of traffic pressure that's coming off of Pueblo West. As Pueblo West grows, traffic to the north of Pueblo wants to divert its way through this particular intersection. And it's a box culvert. You can barely fit most semis through there. Not all semis fit through there and get stuck in it. But there's also a major problem where you literally have to honk your horn at a major intersection under the highway in order to be able to go through. So it's a huge problem from an intersection perspective. We also had lost our rest areas just a couple of miles north of that because of some environmental concerns with the sewage treatment system. And Shane's staff is working on combining these two projects together that helps us leverage the funding for the two projects to get things done. So anyway, I just wanted to mention those two things, of how critically important they are. Shane mentioned the great grant that we got for the Highway 50 passing lanes between Pueblo and Kansas. That's a wonderful effort by Region 2 staff to get us that. And it is the start towards moving more and more towards that 4-laning of Highway 50. So thank you for letting me be on my soapbox one more time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Commissioner Parsons on the online, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Cook. I'd like to echo Commissioner Hart and his appreciation for Director Ferguson and his team. I get to work with the Region 2 team as well, and just appreciate their efforts on all of this. And I'm particularly excited about the Pikes Peak State College North and South Mobility Hubs. I've been able to be in several of the planning meetings for this over time. Mountain Metro has really done a lot of impressive work on their long-range plan, and I think moved things along there faster than I've seen in the years that I've worked in Colorado Springs, frankly. So I've been really impressed by that, but also just the level of partnership. So these meetings that have been gone into the planning here between Mountain Metro, the CDOT team, the city of Fountain actually, and helping coordinate some of these efforts because they work so closely with Fort Carson also, and then the other military installations. So it's really exciting that this is in the plan, and I'm excited about the way that this project itself might serve as a backbone for getting our bus rapid transit program really going down here. So I think that the leadership from this project is going to spur a lot of other efforts that we'll see, a lot of benefits outside of this project in the future. So I'm just really excited about that.
Thank you very much for those comments. Others? Director Sacropani, you represent this area on the CTIO.
I was waiting for it. Although these projects are not under CTIO's purview per se, I am really ecstatic to hear of these projects. I echo Transportation Commissioner Parsons' feeling Pikes Peak State College is in my backyard, and to have these conversations really inspire me to find those creative ways to work together. So thank you, Shane, for all of your effort and Regions 2 staff. Deeply appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd echo all that. I can't believe how much my visit informed my understanding of these slides. So thanks for hosting me again. That culvert, that's not just a culvert that a semi might get stuck in. There's only one car in that culvert at any time. And there are I'm going to say there's a few thousand cars that go through there every day. So they have to work that out, a lot of blind corners and things like that. And then just happened to have pulled off at Pikes Peak State College. So could see understand where that was relative to this mobility hub. It was very impressive. And then one thing too that I think Darius is going to highlight is these projects, a lot of them combine multiple aims in really nice ways. So those 50B passing lanes will combine not just adding those lanes, but resurfacing the segments for all 12 stretches, really contributing to the pavement quality in that area. So thank you very much. Any other? What I'd suggest is a quick break. How about 10 minutes? And then we'll come back and finish these up. Thank you all.
Behind. I know. I was like, I'm technically.
You're free to go.
I am free to go.
take about another minute and then let's plan to get back into it. Let's go ahead and resume and turn it back over to Darius to continue with the presentation on the 10-year plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as we did at the November meeting, we do want to kind of put everything into perspective with how these projects are going to help with fixing our roads and safety and increasing transportation choice. And then want to talk about the 10-year plan as a whole towards the end of the presentation and talk about some next steps. So if we want to go into the next slide, we can talk a little bit about rural roads and fixing our roads. So 39 projects are going to be primarily focusing on the rural road program. And we have some examples that are listed here, and those are indicated on the map. And those, I think Shane, Heather talked about some of those projects already today, but there's another 64 projects that are talking about fixing our roads and improving pavement conditions part of their scope, including some of the major interstate projects like the I-76 Kingsburg project, overlay project that Heather talked about, in addition to many others. So we have over 100 projects focusing on pavement condition throughout the Front Range and Eastern Plains. Go to the next slide, please. There we go. And then 62 projects will be we'll be looking at either primarily focusing on or include as part of their scope focusing on fixing poor bridges, culverts, or other structures throughout the three regions, including some of the projects that were mentioned previously and some of the examples that you can see on the screen here. And of course, we have those in the packet as well. Next slide. As we go into safety, wanted to mention some of the projects that are going to help with improving safety throughout the three regions. Next slide, please. 37 of the projects that are being proposed in these three regions are going to be improving safety through wider shoulder and adding passing lanes throughout highways in the state, including examples such as the US 34 passing lanes and safety improvement projects, the US 85 corridor improvements from Brighton to Upton, among others. We can go to the next slide, please. 67% of the projects are going to be focused on making intersections safer. We have projects such as some of the ones that were mentioned previously in the presentations that the RTDs gave, but we have other projects such as the I-25 Wellington Primary Interchange Design and Pedestrian Crossing Project, the I-25 and Colorado 45 Interchange Safety Improvements, and many, many more, as you can see with the maps on the side here and what's available in your packet. And then finally, we do want to point out that there are projects that have wildlife components and helping to reduce wildlife crashes. While we don't have as much as we had in regions 3 and 5, we do have some of that in regions 1, 2, and 4. And one of those projects was Shane talked about earlier, but there's others throughout the state as well, or throughout these three regions as well. Next slide, please. Finally, looking into sustainably increasing transportation choice. Next slide, please. As we mentioned in the November presentation, as was seen in the packet, $6 million a year has been set aside for fleet, supporting the Bustang fleet in the 10-year plan. And as mentioned, that will be for maintaining and purchasing of the Bustang fleet, which supports lines such as the North Line, the South Line, and now routes throughout the Front Range. But there's also 14 projects that will support Bustang through investments in outrider stops, transit centers, and mobility hubs, with examples such as the Idaho Springs Mobility Hub, Woodsman Road Mobility Hub, the Fairplay Mobility Hub, and there's other examples throughout the packet. And then if we go to the next slide, there's 30 projects listed in there that help support local transit service with support with local partners. There was many good examples in the presentations that were given. Some of those examples are mentioned here, such as the Federal Boulevard and Colorado Boulevard BRT, the Pikes Peak State College North and South Mobility Hubs, and there's many other examples. Another great example is the Colorado 119 Bus Rapid Transit Safety Mobility Improvements, which is a carryover project, but that is continuing to be constructed as we speak in Region 4. And then finally, when we take a look at active transportation, 54 projects have active transportation elements throughout the plan, with many examples listed here. Far too many to mention in the limited time that we have in the presentation, but those are all listed in the packet. And thank you, Chair Cook, for mentioning that in the packet. We do want to mention that we have the project types, the project elements, so you can see at a high level what is being proposed on the many different aspects of those projects, that it's not just focusing on one aspect of trying to improve not just pavement, but also we have active transportation elements, we're improving safety, we're improving structures, and everything else when we're able to go out and do the work with these projects throughout the state. Next slide, please. Finally, there is, of course, the Joint Service and Front Range Passenger Rail. These projects don't receive strategic funds, but they are important projects as part of the transportation solution over the next next 10 to 20 years. I believe there was a presentation to the commission in August on these projects, but at just a high level, the Joint Service Passenger Rail between Union Station and Fort Collins, and that interagency agreement that was signed between the partners on that, and of course, Front Range Passenger Rail along the Front Range corridor. And looking at the 2020 GRISI grant and the Fund the Service Development Plan. And then in November, we had talked about the Mountain Rail project and the goal to get the service out to Granby by the end, by November, I believe, in KE, and Paul, you can correct me on that, by November 2026. Very good. All right. Next slide, please. So kind of to wrap up, I wanted to wrap up taking a look at the plan as a whole now that we have introduced all of those projects to you as part of the November and this presentation this month. If we want to go to the next slide. I do want to emphasize that we had a outreach and a process working with our local partners over the past year and a half, which started back in May of 2024. Now, while CDOT primarily works with our rural partners, which includes many numerous meetings, the telephone town halls the commissioners held, our MPO partners have done that as well in order to help get to the point that we're at today in order to get the priority projects that were brought forward to today. And so my staff and primarily the RTD staff has been working hard in order to develop the not only the statewide plan, but this plan in order to put together the investments that we believe that what we heard from our local planning partners is the most important items in order to fund over the next 10 years and identify in the 20 years as part of not only the 10-year plan, but also the rural transportation plans that our MPO partners put together and that the rural TPRs put together as well. We also wanted to have an emphasis on focusing on fixing our assets, which we'll talk about in a couple of other slides as well, with continuing the rural road railroad paving program and having an emphasis on that. And then identifying projects for cooperation with our local partners on projects that we believe that have the support through the process that was developed over the past year and a half. Next slide, please. So following back up on some questions from the last month, Transportation Commission workshop. So the asset management program, what will be brought forward for a adoption is planning budgets for out years, and these budgets allow CDOT staff to plan out the program of projects and projects in future years. Is not the actual budgets, but a planning total for the surface treatment, bridge preventative maintenance, and other asset programs. Basically increasing the asset management budget by 5.4% in 2030 and an additional 2.1% in 2031. So, and to 390 million in 2030 and 398 million in 2031. And so when we take a look at our asset management plan, which is required under federal statute, we have about a $350 million gap for our roadway assets. And we periodically update that plan. We'll probably do another one by March of 2027, which requires that extensive analysis required under current federal legislation for transportation funding. And we do that periodically. So that's kind of the need that we have out there. But how we are helping to address that need based on those planning budgets, if we want to go to the next slide, is when we take a look at the 10-year plan, is that's how we're helping to address that need, is not only just with the surface treatment budget, which is around $270 million a year, but addressing that by having more than half of our 10-year plan projects, about 53%, focusing on pavement and bridge asset elements as part of their project scope. And when you take a look at that, it is equivalent to adding an additional 65% to the surface treatment, to the additional surface treatment budget. So over the next 10 years, that's like adding another 7 years to the surface treatment program over those 10 years. So that's one of the ways on how we're able to help fill in those gaps. And then there's other infusion of funds that can help as well, such as the 80 million that came from redistribution that was authorized for the TC to help fix some of the low drivability life roads that were identified in each of the regions, and the 65 million that was authorized for culverts throughout the state in 2023 as recent examples. And then the presentation that I believe was in November that the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise was contributing 125 million over 10 years to help with continue to keep our bridges in good condition for bridge preventative maintenance projects throughout the state. If we want to go to the next slide. And taking a look at what has happened in the past and what's available in the future is when you take a look at the previous 10-year plan, we had two major enterprises when the previous 10-year plan was adopted. CTIO, which at that time had a previous name, in the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise, and they had provided or were planning to provide through that was approved by their boards $1 billion since 2019. Now those enterprises, of course, everything is up for their boards to discuss, but they have been, as mentioned previously by what has been mentioned through the CTI board at this meeting. And I'm sure as you can watch through the other boards, board of directors meetings, as well as be able to help improve the investment or improve the transportation system of Colorado. They are anticipating to have approximately 5.2 million to invest in the transportation system over the next 10 years in various areas. Now, of course, their scopes may be a little bit narrower. They have specific business purposes, but they do have additional funds to invest over the next 2 years. And I will note that Senate Bill 184 did require CTIO to have a capital development plan that is in line with the with CDOT's 10-year plan and the Colorado GHG planning standard as well. So, and there was a version of that was published, and I believe after the 10-year plan is published, that's probably something that's the board may want to look at. I don't want to speak for them, but that may be something to look at in the future. So. These are the five. I think that's another point is there's not only 2 enterprises, there's 5 enterprises now. So you have the Clean Transit Enterprise that has come out since that time that was created in 2022. Same with the Non-Attainment Area Air Pollution Mitigation Enterprise and the Fuels Impact Enterprise, which has already contributed to a project in the 10-year plan that's going forward, which is the I-70 Horizon to Palisade Drive project. I hope I got that right, Jason. All right, good. 8.1 million on that resurfacing project. Next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit more about the GHG planning standard in a little bit with our report, which is primarily focused on the non-MPO areas. But when you take a look at the compliance with that standard and all the good the MPOs and us working together to develop the plans that truly help elevate multimodal options forward, we're going to show that we're able to meet the reduction levels that are required of CDOT in the non-MPO areas. But when you take a look at what the latest plan that was adopted by DRCOG and their transportation report that was accepted by the commission, same with the North Front Range, same with the Pikes Peak, same with the Grand Valley MPO, all of those reduction levels are required on there. They've all met the required reduction levels that is mentioned in the rule. And there's one MPO I have not mentioned yet, which is Pueblo. So we've already met the required reduction standards in the rule, and Pueblo has not produced a plan that they are not required to produce a plan that has met that yet because of where they're at yet. So, but they will be doing that here over the next few months. So. Do want to mention that, and we'll get into more of that in a little bit. Next slide, please. Finally, in order to help with data-driven decision-making, to take a look at where we're at with some of our metrics, we have dashboards that are updated usually on an annual basis. That's usually when we get the information, but these are available on our website now. We have our 10-year plan account project status and funding dashboard that we update. Actually, this one we update on a monthly basis, usually if the commission takes action to move money around. So that's available on codot.gov. We have a Policy Directive 14 dashboard that is updated on an annual basis. We have a pavement condition dashboard that you can see the condition of every single state highway in state and see whether it's condition of drivability life based on the latest available data. Same with bridges, all 3,500 bridges throughout the state. We have a national performance measure dashboard, which has the measures that we're required to report under the IIJA. And then we have a Colorado crash dashboard that's maintained by our traffic and safety unit. So we have information that we're able to see to make decisions, because as we go through this, we have opportunity to make updates to the plan throughout different stages throughout this as situations change. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, finalization of the next steps. And I think this is the one I wanted to get to. Next slide, please. Is as we look through maintaining the plan, like if there's any projects that come in and off, that's a commission decision that will be brought forth to the commission. And the same thing with moving around funds. Occasionally, the chief financial officer usually brings forward a resolution to move project savings or to move funding around for 10-year plan funds. That is the decision that will come forward. And then for management of those projects, there's a robust project management process for managing these projects as well. Plus, the commission approves the STIP that allocates the funding decisions for the next 4 years as required under federal statute, and approves the annual budget in November, and I think in March as well, that truly allocates the funds. And then we will update the plan again in a minimum in about the spring of 2029. Those out years, the 31 plus, those become a little bit more real in terms of dollars. We have a little bit more certainty in what those dollars look like. And so we will reevaluate and we'll put those dollars in and we'll have those conversations again. Next slide, please. Part of our reporting process includes not only the accountability dashboard that I had mentioned, but we publish the colorful tables, a version of which that says draft is in your packet. We publish new versions of that on codot.gov on a quarterly basis. We include a version of that in the annual budget submission in November. We include statistics on not just the 10-year plan, but projects throughout the state in our accomplishments report that we produce around February after the end of the calendar year. A lot of great information on projects and grants and on various programs, not just the 10-year plan. And then finally, a lot of our projects have information have their own web pages on codot.gov, among other things that our excellent communications staff does to get out the information on what we have for our capital construction program. Next slide, please. So kind of the roadmap for adoption. We do have an anticipated comment period to be open later on in this month. One potential question that we have for the commission today is what would be what comfort level as far as how long the commission would like. Just for reference, the last time we had a 10-year plan open, it was open for 2 weeks. And that was in September of 2022, the last time we had a 10-year plan 10-year plan adoption schedule. And then we'll have that comments available for folks to provide comments at codot.gov, and we will make appropriate arrangements with the public and social channels and our planning partners for folks to provide comments on the projects in the 10-year plan. I'll see if there's any thoughts after that, because I think this is my last slide. And then after the public comment and final updates, the plan will be brought forward for adoption for the commission and any comments. And then of course that will send in line the STIP, which is something that we do on an annual basis. And then the framework for project development. And of course we bring forward other items such as our greenhouse gas reports, our PD14 reports, and everything else that we have that we do on an annual basis. And at a minimum, we will be back in 2029 to talk about the 10-year plan. And of course, we do have regular project updates throughout this time. Next slide, please, just to make sure that I didn't have, yes, this is the adoption schedule, of course. And when the commission's ready, of course, we can bring forward a adoption resolution. But I think that wraps up my presentation for today, and happy to answer any questions commissioners have.
A quick clarification question. Have all the comments we've been getting, do those get automatically fed into our consideration of the comments during the public comment period? I mean, do they have to resubmit or just?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I think we can work with our Office of Public and Government Relations staff to see if they're for a 10-year plan project to see on there, because that, I know we've been talking about that, and I know if it's direct. We haven't really published this, shown all of these projects yet on the 10-year plan, even though some of these projects are carryover, but we can at least consider that piece as we go forward, knowing that some of these comments have came in before.
Yeah. So instead of opening it for 2 weeks, closing it at the end of 2 weeks or something that allows the comments that have been coming in to be included, I guess. Okay, any questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Jones.
Thanks. Darius, thanks for that really comprehensive presentation, and to the region directors for their very detailed talk as well. Really appreciated it. I had a question. Before I came on the TC, I understand we adopted PD14 performance measures, including some specific things around 1% annual reduction in VMT per capita, and increase in statewide revenue service miles for transit, that kind of thing. Do you, because I know I don't, take the draft 10-year plan and analyze how and whether it is on track for helping us meet the goals that we set for it? At some point in this process, do we get how the plan, for example, is doing with regards to VMT reduction and whether or not it's meeting the goals that we set?
The answer is yes. We update we provide updates on the metrics on an annual basis through the scorecards I mentioned.
So let me just re-ask that. The draft plan that we haven't adopted, before we adopt it, will we get to know whether or not it achieves the goals we set for it?
So it's kind of hard to know that offhand, because when we take a look at things such as VMT reduction, it's a little bit hard to make that total determination on there. But what I can tell you is that based on what we have done previously and what is in the plan, is that we have seen VMT per capita decrease year over year based on the current data. And are we able to make the promise that it's going to have a 1% decrease every single year? I don't know offhand, but when we're able to model and maybe able to make those goals, that's something that we can evaluate every single year when we have that data available through PD14, and see how we are meeting those goals.
Okay, it would be useful to know before we adopt a plan if it meets the goals we set out for the plan, however that process works, given the modeling that we do. But sounds like we have a different process in place, but I guess I would throw that out as a logical process to follow.
Yeah, and I will also mention that when we take a look at the measures that we set out, it is for our statewide plan and taking a look at all of our projects and all of our programs built together and how we are able to show for a holistic transportation system and what we want for the vision of the transportation system in the future. But our 10-year plan is our strategic project, but we also take into consideration all the stuff from our innovative mobility programs, all of our grant programs that we do, and some of the other programs that we don't mention here, but also make up part of our capital construction program.
Yeah, and modeling did show that, for example, GHG reduction targets are met with the projects that you've got in the 10-year plan. I think I saw that mentioned here.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you, Darius. I have one quick it's a clarification question, and it's on your slide that's on page 89 of the packet regarding the passenger rail. And it has a bullet point in there about the CRISI 2020 grant. Is that grant still in place? I thought I heard at a previous presentation that was no longer there. Did I mishear and misunderstand? Can you clarify that, please?
I'm going to phone a friend and ask Paul, can you help answer that question? Oh, Jeff, let's go ahead.
Yeah, I think the answer is that grant was canceled.
Okay, and that's kind of what I had thought I understood, but yet it shows up on our slides here, so.
Mistake on our part, and we'll get that corrected.
Yeah, just for the public's sake, because I
Yeah.
know I get that question frequently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
The slide on page 89 is for CRISI 2020. That's not the grant, that's the planning grant as opposed to the construction grant.
Got it. That's right. We did have two grants. We had an earlier planning grant, and then we had the $65 million grant that's the one that was recently canceled.
Oh, the $65 million grant was the one that was canceled.
Yes, correct.
The one we really need.
The one we really need.
Thank you. And may I make a comment? And Darius, I want to commend you and your staff for all the work that you have provided in this and being as part of the subcommittee and reviewing what you've done. Your response to what the subcommittee has asked you to do and add here has been just A1 work. And kudos to you and your staff, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner, but I would be remiss if not, of course, my staff, they deserve all the credit, and also the RTDs and their regional staff deserve a lot of credit for all the work they put in as well.
Vice Chair Bowman, please.
Just a bravo to you and all the staff. I mean, this has been an amazing presentation today. Thank you very, very much. You knocked it out of the park. Thank you.
Go ahead, Gary Beatty.
Also throw out all the planning regions that gave all the feedback in on helping prioritize these lists for the regional directors to then figure out how they get the actual funding put to pieces and how we get it all into that final list. So want to also recognize all the planning regions that help put their input in.
Thank you. That's a good contribution.
Well, I think Jason and Julie set us off on a really good path, and these guys have just taken it up, you know, and expanded on it, which has just been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd echo all of that and just say, you know, I appreciate all the work starting from the initial public output or public outreach and going through this moment. I think this is one of the finest sets of backup that I've seen, and it reflects not just how you're communicating it, but really the substance of the plan and how it ties to the process to this point, PD 14 and the performance piece and then communicating. I just think it's fabulous. So thank you very much. And I want to extend that to all the regions as well. And then Gary Beatty's point about the TPRs and those folks. Okay, next we're up with a budget workshop. We have Jeff Sudmeyer. I didn't see Bethany, but both of you please.
And with the chair's permission, I'd actually like to flip the order on this. We have Brian Stelmack with Stiefel with us, who is the department's financial advisor, and I think we're a bit behind, so he's got to leave in a bit. So if we could reverse the order, that'd be helpful.
Sure, we're going to take up the HQ building COP
There we go.
funding.
Thank you. So I'm going to brief you today on a proposed refunding of some outstanding CDOT debt obligations. I'll brief you today and then anticipate requesting approval of the specific parameters of the transaction next month, with the refunding transaction itself planned for the month of March. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Thank you, Leslie. So the proposed transaction is a refunding to certificates of participation, or COPs, that were originally issued by the department in 2016 and 2017. Before I get into the specifics of the transaction, let me provide a little bit of background on what a COP is, for those of you that might not be familiar. A COP is a critical tool under Tabor because it's a debt instrument that doesn't constitute a multi-year fiscal obligation, as do other traditional debt instruments like long-term revenue bonds. So a COP can be issued without needing a public vote to authorize. While the enterprises have the ability to issue debt without a public vote, CDOT does not, unless it is in the form of a COP or other instruments that aren't considered a multi-fiscal year obligation. And then CDOT's authority to issue COPs is only for certain purposes. Actually, it's just for regional and headquarters facilities. So this slide provides a side-by-side comparison of a COP to a traditional bond. I won't go through this line by line, but just to summarize, unlike a bond, which is a debt claim backed by the pledge of taxes or other revenue streams, creating a multi-year fiscal commitment, a COP is backed by assets, typically buildings, which a trustee holds title to and then assigns interest to investors. So in our particular case, the issuer, which in this case is CDOT, provides buildings as collateral. In this case, it would actually be, this is one of the pieces of collateral, this building, and then we lease back those assets. So instead of us making a debt payment, we are essentially making lease payments to investors. And at the end of the term of the COP, which is typically 20 or 30 years, the title of the asset transfers back to the issuer. So, so let's go on to the next slide here. So getting into the specifics of these COPs, CDOT issued 70 million in COPs in 2016 to finance the land acquisition and construction of this building and the Region 4 headquarters building in Greeley. A year later, we issued COPs totaling 58.7 million to fund the CDOT Region 2 headquarters building in Pueblo, as well as a few other facility improvements. Both of these COPs will become callable in this upcoming June. And so callable just means that the bonds or in this case, COPs, can be purchased back from investors early before their scheduled maturity. And that's typically done, as we're doing in this case, in order to refinance that debt at a lower interest rate. So we're able to call or refund the COPs as early as 90 days before the call date, which in this case is March 17. So a few other notes on the current COPs. A portion of those COPs, so those two series together, total 128.7 million. A portion of those COPs totaling about 22 million were actually refunded in 2020. So what we're talking about with this refunding opportunity is essentially the remaining amounts from these series 2016 and 2017, which would be less that 22 million that had already been refunded. The outstanding COPs maintain a high investment grade rating of, in the case of S&P, AAA minus rating. Let's go on to the next slide. So of the original 128.7 million that was issued between the 2016 and 2017 issuances, as I mentioned, about 22 million was refunded in 2020. We've also been making payments against these COPs for the last 9 to 10 years. So after accounting for what has been paid down and what has already been refunded, we will need to issue approximately 68 million in refunding COPs to pay off or defease the remaining balances on those 2016 and 2017 COPs. So this proposed transaction, this refunding based on current market conditions, is estimated to result in about 8.8 million in cash flow savings over the remaining life of the COPs, which is through 2041, or net present value savings of 6.9 million, which represents a 9.02% savings rate. And actually, Brian was just giving me some updated figures based on more recent data since we put the packet together. And I forgot where I wrote that down, Brian, but I think it was, we were up to 8 million, I believe, in savings and a 10.5% savings rate. Does that sound right? Yeah. So it's actually improved since we put this together. So we'd be looking at more, closer to 8 million in net present value savings over the life of the remaining bond, and over 10% in savings. So what does that mean on an annual basis? On an annual basis, our lease payments on these outstanding COPs will go down by about 700,000 a year from the current amount of about 9 million. It says 588,000 on this slide, average annual cash flow savings. The newer numbers that we have actually is going to be more than 700,000 in annual savings. So the outstanding debt, those 2016 and 2017 COPs, just to give you a little bit more information on sort of what we're looking at in terms of rates. Those existing COPs carry original coupons ranging from 3 to 5%. We're looking at, with this transaction, we're estimating that our all-in borrowing costs on this, our total true interest cost, will be about 3.35%. So, and just to put that a little bit more into context, the true interest cost on those original COPs were 4.21% for 2016 and 3.645% for 2017. So again, you can see we're refinancing, refunding. We're going to get that down to more like a 3.35% true interest cost. All right, where am I? So I'll also note, I think let's go on to the next slide. Yep, actually, sorry, I got a slide or two behind. So again, this just kind of shows you where we're at. The original coupons, again, ranging from 3 to 5%. We are In terms of rates, we're kind of in the mid-range right now with the 20-year average for the MMD AAA yield curve. That's sort of our benchmark for this type of an instrument. And again, we're achieving a savings rate. This says 9%, actually now more than 10%. There's a target by the Government Finance Officers Association of 3 to 5%. They basically say if it's more than 3 to 5%, 3 to 5% or more, it's probably worth refunding. We're at about 10%. All right, let's go to the next slide. So this slide outlines the steps involved in the refunding transaction. We're currently in phase 2, documents and due diligence. We're coordinating with bond counsel on legal documents and drafting the preliminary official statement, which is the offering document used to market the transaction to potential investors. We'll meet with rating agencies and secure ratings in late January, early February. As noted, we'll be back in February to seek TC approval of the financing terms and to get your authorization to move forward. We'll then market, price, and close the transaction in March. And then in the final step, post-closing, there's a series of continuing ongoing disclosure and other reporting requirements that we'll have to continue to meet as long as those refunding COPs are outstanding, which means through 2041. Okay, next slide, please. So these next few slides walk through each of the documents associated with the transaction. You are welcome to review those documents, but you don't have to. You're not going to have to review individual financing documents. If I had you do that, it would be several hundred pages. Just to kind of walk you through a little bit of what the process looks like and what those documents are. First, authorization governance documents. That includes the TC's formal approval to authorize the transaction and delegate to staff the authority to execute the transaction. The one item that you will be approving, and which I'll bring to you next month, is the parameters resolution. That is a resolution you'll be asked to approve. You actually recently saw this in the last year or two for the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise transactions. And same thing, you got a parameters resolution. The parameters resolution essentially gives staff the authority to execute the transaction within certain prescribed terms. So that resolution will outline the maximum amount we can issue, the maximum interest rate we can pay, and the required savings to move forward with the transaction. So it gives us authority to do the transaction, but only within the parameters in that resolution. In addition to the parameters resolution, getting into some of those documents that, again, you're welcome to review, but don't have to. The other authorization governance document is the trust indenture. That's the contract between CDOT and the trustee that outlines how funds are handled, how lease payments are paid, and the trustee's duties to investors. Let's go to the next slide. Documents relating to lease and security structure. That includes a site lease, which is actually, in the case of this, the lease for this building. Lease between CDOT and the trustee for the property that is offered as collateral. The lease purchase agreement, which is the agreement by which the trustee leases the property back to CDOT. So actually I got that flipped in exchange for base rental payments, essentially debt service. Next slide, please. And then disclosure and marketing documents. These include the preliminary official statement, which is the prospectus used to market the COPs to investor. The final official statement, which is basically just a final updated version of that preliminary official statement that captures the final terms of the transaction. And then continuing disclosure undertaking, which is, again, the ongoing reporting that we have to do for any debt instrument that we hold. And then finally, let's see, next slide. Am I on the right spot? Yes. And finally, the escrow agreement. The escrow agreement outlines how to handle proceeds from the new refunding COPs. So to give you a little bit of background on how this transaction works, in March, we will go out and we will issue refunding COPs. So that's essentially new debt. The proceeds from that transaction get placed into an escrow account with the trustee, and they're invested in U.S. Treasuries until we get to the call date. The call date is in June. In June, those balances are taken out of escrow. They're used to pay off that old debt from 2016 and 2017, and then now we have new debt at a lower interest rate. So let's go to I think we've got just a few slides left on this presentation. Go to the next slide. So yeah, and actually that maybe was the last slide. So I'll wrap up here. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. Again, next month I'll be back with a follow-up workshop. During that workshop, we'll outline some additional specifics on the proposed transaction. And then we'll walk through the parameters resolution. Really, what are those limits on the transaction that we'll ask you to approve? And then if you are so inclined to approve, we are on target to move forward with the transaction in early March. So happy to take any questions or any comments or feedback. But otherwise, that concludes what I have on the COP topic today.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions? I'm seeing none. However, I do want to ask one. Are we extending the term of the debt? Oh,
We are not. So we'll be maintaining the, and actually, if you go back a few slides, I think there's a bar chart slide that's maybe a good one. I kind of went through this a little bit quickly. Go back one more. So this shows you the current debt already goes through 2041. If you see the, let's see if I'm reading this correctly. What you're looking at is what our debt profile looks like after we are doing the refunding. So the current debt goes out to 2041. After we've executed this, it'll be made up of the yellow, which is the piece we've already refunded, and the blue, which is the new debt. And then you see in the hash mark, that's sort of the savings each year. So long story short, we're maintaining the same term out to 2041.
and seeing savings. That's great. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the representative from Stifel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, I was looking at the wrong person. Okay, so next is the FY 26-27 annual budget update.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I do have some content on the fiscal year 27 budget I want to cover with you today. We're going to pick up where we left off with the commission in November with the development of the fiscal year 27 CDOT budget. In November, we sought TC approval of the budget in draft form in order to submit it to the Office of State Planning and Budget by a December 15 submittal deadline. Next month, we'll be back with additional updates to the draft budget, which will include decision items, updates to our administration budget based on common policy changes coming out of the legislature, and other final actions related to balancing the budget. So we'll then review the final budget with the commission one last time in March, at which time we'll request adoption so we can submit it by an April deadline for final budget submittal. So in preparation for these upcoming final budget workshops, I was going to take a little time today to do a bit of a deeper dive on revenues and the current proposed revenue allocations. Let's go ahead and let's go one more slide. Excuse me. Go ahead one more, Leslie. Thank you. As a reminder, the draft fiscal year 27 budget, we don't put this in your packet. It'll take up a lot of space in your packet, but there is a link in your packet. It's available on the CDOT website. It includes two key elements. That's the revenue allocation plan and the spending plan. Let's go to the next slide. The revenue allocation plan, that's the element of the budget that allocates forecasted revenues to specific programs. For fiscal year 27, we are forecasting $2.3 billion in total revenues across CDOT and the 5 enterprises, with approximately $1.7 billion of that being CDOT and roughly $615 million being the enterprises. Next slide, please. The complement to the revenue allocation plan is the spending plan, whereas the revenue allocation plan outlines how we allocate the new revenue coming in the door. The spending plan outlines planned expenditures both from those new revenues as well as our existing fund balances. For fiscal year 27, we are estimating nearly $2.8 billion in expenditures, about $2.3 billion of those being CDOT and about $500 million the enterprises. Next slide, please. I wanted to take a few minutes to put our fiscal year 27 revenues in context of the last several years. We've seen a lot of changes to transportation funding in recent years. And we've also, I'd also say, I think there's been a fair amount of confusion about how much new revenue has been generated from various bills over the last few years and where those revenues flow. So the next couple of slides are going to speak a little bit to that and try to maybe provide a little bit more clarity. I will note that I've updated these slides a bit from what's in your packet. So you'll note there's one new slide, and I think I had found something that needed a tweak. So apologies for the late change, but I can certainly do that. Happy to. This slide shows CDOT revenue in the blue and red bars and enterprise revenue in the yellow and green bars. And it goes back to fiscal year 18. The different colors break the revenue out between new state revenues put in place through legislation over the last 5 years and all the other revenue sources. So everything that's not from new state legislation in the last 5 years. For fiscal year 27, these pieces of legislation, and you can see on the slide, all the pieces we're talking about: Senate Bill 260, Senate Bill 280, Senate Bill 184, Senate Bill 230, Senate Bill 320. These are the primary transportation funding bills over the last 5 years. So the in the fiscal year 27, so this upcoming fiscal year, the revenue from those pieces of legislation total about $475 million. About $197 million of that is the portion that flows to CDOT, with $275 million being the portions that flow to the enterprises. You can also see on this slide how much those new revenues represent as a share of total revenue. So for CDOT, the only one of those bills that I mentioned that has funds directed to CDOT is Senate Bill 260, the big marquee transportation legislation of about 5 years ago. In fiscal year 27, that 260 revenues represent about 12% of total CDOT revenues. For enterprises, how many bills is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those 5 bills, all 5 of those bills have dollars flowing to enterprises, and they represent a much larger share of overall enterprise revenue. So in fiscal year 27, those bills represent 45% of the revenues that are flowing to the enterprises. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide shows CDOT and enterprise revenue going back to fiscal year 18. It's inclusive of that additional legislative revenue I showed you on the last slide. The blue bars are CDOT revenue, and the red/orange bars are the enterprise revenues. You'll see that the CDOT revenues ramped up quite a bit between fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 22. That was because during that period of time, we issued COPs again. We issued over $2 billion in COPs that were authorized by Senate Bill 17-267 over the course of about 4 years. So if you look out to 27, while we have seen growth in CDOT revenues over this whole 9-year period, we've come back down from the peak that was associated with that one-time Senate Bill 267 funding. So looking at sort of how much of revenue is growing on the right, including the new legislative funding, which in the case of CDOT, again, is just the 260 revenues. CDOT revenues are about 18% higher in fiscal year 27 than they were in fiscal year 18. If you annualize that, though, and look over that entire period, that's about 2% revenue growth annually that we've seen from fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 27. Enterprise revenues, however, have grown significantly more. Enterprise revenues have grown 385% since fiscal year 18, or 19% on an annualized basis. I'll say I often hear confusion about the enterprise revenues and how they can be used. This slide breaks down enterprise revenues, and this is my breakdown. This is not official. I guess it's official, but it's sort of my way of looking at this. I'll say I've broken down the enterprise revenues. You see the red and the orange between what I'll call roadway-focused enterprise revenue and other enterprise revenue. So generally speaking, the roadway-focused enterprise revenues, which are in red, are the bridge and tunnel enterprise revenues and the CTIO express lane revenues, right? So if you kind of take that together and you say, okay, CDOT, bridge and tunnel, the CTIO express lanes, kind of more the traditional, not CDOT is obviously more than roadways, but if you kind of just look at those together, then you see we've seen about an increase in those programs about 34% or about 3.3% annualized. Unfortunately, much of that increase has been eroded by inflation. So over that same time frame, if you look at the National Highway Construction Cost Index, it's the national measure. So admittedly not Colorado data, but national data. That index increased 72% over the same time period, or 9% annualized. So you know, inflation obviously has been eroding a lot of purchasing power, not just in transportation, but we have definitely seen it in our industry. So the other enterprise revenues represented by the orange, those include the revenues flowing to the clean transit enterprise, the non-attainment enterprise, and the congestion impact fee revenue dedicated to transit and rail and flowing through CTIO. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a reference point between, you know, how much of those revenues are going to the enterprise revenues are going to more of the traditional roadway type of activities, and how much are going to transit, rail, and electrification. I point that out in particular because, you know, we often, I think, have confusion about sort of what can go where. Those revenues, so those orange revenues, are legislatively directed to very specific purposes, including transit and rail and electrification, and they cannot be used by CDOT for highway improvements. And so I just want to be clear on that. Not only are they not directed by the Transportation Commission or by CDOT, their enterprise revenue, they're statutorily directed to non-roadway purposes. So with that as a little bit of background on just sort of like trying to put into context the various revenue streams and the changes over the last few years, I'm going to segue into the next part of the presentation, which is going to shift us back to the revenue allocation plan, how we allocate funds, and what those allocations look like in fiscal year 27. And I'm going to try to move through the next couple slides pretty quickly because we covered much of this earlier in the budget cycle. But I'll start with just sort of briefly recapping how we allocate revenue. You know, a lot of the work for us is done with the budget by the fact that many of our revenue streams are dedicated to very specific purposes and programs. And so we don't have to bring it to the commission and say, what do you want to do with it? We just simply reflect the forecasted revenues for those programs. We also have some programs where we have pre-established funding levels that we could choose to change, but we use, at least initially, we set at that same amount. Examples are the RPP program, which has been set at 50 million for the last several years. Innovative Mobility is set at 9 million for the last few years. So some of these, a lot of our budget programs have sort of a predetermined starting point that we bring to you as our initial level. Our administration and operations budget is developed through a pretty extensive internal budget setting process with the regions and divisions. That portion of the budget, though, is really mostly updated annually simply to reflect increases in salaries and benefits as well as common policies. Then we have some programs that are following a set schedule, like debt service. And then finally, we have our asset management planning totals, which I think Darius talked to you about last month. We actually set those with the commission a few years in advance, and then provided that the revenues are sufficient to meet those planning targets. That's what we put into the budget. So let's go on to the next slide. These next two slides, again, I think you've seen these slides before. I'm not going to go through these in detail. I think the key takeaway here is again, that most of our funding sources have fairly narrowly prescribed uses in statute, which limits our flexibility in terms of how they're allocated. Next slide. Generally speaking, our federal funds are allocated to the capital construction program. Some of those federal funds are sub-allocated to MPOs as required by law. And then our flexible state funds, the HUTF, that's the second bar there in orange, are essentially fully utilized, matching the federal funds and then paying for the things that the federal funds can't pay for. And that's namely maintenance and operations and administration, which are not eligible, unfortunately, I'll say, for federal reimbursement. I'd love to be able to bill the feds for some of that. But let's go to the next slide. So you've seen these next two slides. I think you're pretty familiar with. I'm going to breeze through these because then I'm going to deep dive a little bit into each of the individual categories. So this slide, again, just showing our revenue sources. I'll highlight here that about 73% of the revenues flow to CDOT and are under the supervision of the Transportation Commission, and about 27% flow to the enterprises and are under the supervision of the Enterprises Board, which, as you know, in the case of the Fuels Impact Enterprise and the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise is also the Transportation Commission, but not the case with the other three. I wanted to mention, I mentioned, Commissioner, that I'd come back to this month. Commissioner Gutierrez had a good comment last month about how we present budgets and revenues for CDOT and the enterprises, and about the confusion that sometimes arises related to this. And I wanted to point out that there are a couple of reasons why both the enterprises and CDOT revenues appear in the CDOT budget documents. So I wanted to just kind of spend a minute articulating that, but then also have a few thoughts on maybe what we could do to make that a little more clear. So again, our CDOT budget documents do include information on all the enterprises, despite the commission only approving the CDOT budget. Again, a couple of reasons for that. First, while the enterprises have different governance structures, they do operate as divisions of CDOT. That also means that they're included in the Department of Transportation. They're included as part of the Department of Transportation in the overall state budget, and reported to the legislature also in hearings with the Joint Budget Committee and the committees as part of CDOT. So that's one of the reasons why we try to bring it all together, because we do have to submit it as a single budget document to the legislature. And so I'll note that while it's important that we acknowledge and maintain separations between CDOT and the enterprises, and I'm sure Justin would agree with me here, I know he's always trying to make sure that we are mindful of those divisions. We also need to be able to talk about them together. So the thing I wanted to say, I wanted to spend just a moment kind of acknowledging the comment, Commissioner, and some of the reasons why we do try to represent them. I do think you make a good point, though, and I think I would like to work with our budget team at looking if there might be some ways we can make that a little bit more clear, that essentially in the CDOT budget, only a portion of it is supervised and approved by the commission. There are other portions that are supervised and approved by other enterprise boards. So I think you raise a good point, and I think we're going to look at some ways we can try to make that delineation more clear. All right, moving on. Let's see. This next slide you're familiar with also, which just outlines the budget category, by budget category, how funds are allocated. I'm going to skip over this because we're going to touch on each of these categories in a little more detail in the following slides, and then I'll try to wrap up so you can get to your final agenda item. So again, we've got broad budget categories that the budget is organized around. I'm going to go through each of them pretty quickly and just spend a little bit more time talking about what is in each of those budget categories. Not surprisingly, the single biggest, largest category of allocation is capital construction. In fiscal year 27, your proposed budget allocates $665 million to capital construction, with an additional $120 million allocated to capital construction by the enterprises. I'll say that generally, I would say we make effort to maximize the amount of funds flowing to capital construction, but I'll note that how much we can maximize the funds flowing to capital construction is a little bit of a function of what is left after we've allocated funds to maintenance, operations and administration, and other required and flexible programs. So I think this is definitely the category where we try to get as much funding as we can, but it is a zero-sum game, and there is a lot of it is a function of sort of what is left when we've required increases elsewhere in the budget. The commission, I'll note, has a lot more flexibility to shift how funds are allocated within the capital construction budget than they do to increase it overall. So you can see on this slide how that capital construction, those allocations break down by use. About 52%, so a little over half of our capital construction funding goes to our asset management programs, including surface treatment. About 18% go to safety programs such as FASTER and HSIP. About 7% to the regional priority program, which is a flexible program that the regions are able to use for a lot of different transportation needs across the region. And then about 21% goes to the 10-year plan. So these numbers change a little bit year over year, but I'd say in general, this is pretty representative of how the commission allocates those capital construction dollars across programs. And again, the asset management portions, you've talked about this with Darius. We have a TAM cap, an asset management cap. Darius works with you all to make recommendations on how to allocate that cap, and that's what we reflect in the budget. Go on to the next slide. So our next largest category of funding is maintenance and operations. The limiting factor here, I would really say, is revenue. Obviously, that's true of everything in a budget, but I think one of the features of maintenance and operations is, again, that it's not eligible for federal funding. And so I would say that in the case of maintenance and operations, almost always our projected need to meet sort of our basic performance measures for maintenance and operations of the system almost always exceeds the amount of flexible state funds we have available to pay for it. So that's what I mean when I say the revenue is really the limiting factor here. In total, about $430 million goes to maintenance and operations programs annually on the CDOT side, with the majority of that, about 80%, going to our core MLOS, Maintenance Levels of Service program. Other programs in the maintenance and operations category include our traffic operations program, including our ITS systems, our property budget, our capital equipment budget, and a strategic safety program, which provides a source of funding for small, quick hit safety improvements, many of which are administered by our maintenance forces, such as I think guardrail replacement is a good example of where some of those strategic safety funds go. Next slide, please. Sub-allocated programs, that includes both funds directed by the MPOs and TPRs, as well as CDOT administered grant programs. I'll note that we generally don't have much flexibility in this category, as these programs, almost every single one of these programs are statutory. And so again, the commission often exercises authority in terms of how do we select projects, or what's the process to select projects. But in terms of the programs themselves, really these sub-allocated programs and grant programs are almost without exception all statutory programs. Across CDOT and the enterprises, these programs total more than $465 million annually. You also note that these programs are actually more heavily focused on multimodal transit, rail, and aviation than they are on pure highway. And again, this is more of, really a statutory feature more than a commission or enterprise board decision to prioritize one mode over the other. Each of these programs, again, statutory programs that we administer in accordance to state or federal law. All right, next category, multimodal and mobility programs. These total over $100 million across CDOT and the enterprises. And actually, as I've noted in going through these slides, actually a portion of the innovative mobility program probably belongs in the other slide for sub-allocated programs. So the next time I refine this, I'll make that edit. But otherwise, these are dollars that are not granted out, but rather are directly invested in multimodal programs by CDOT or the enterprises. On the CDOT side, that includes Bustang, the Innovative Mobility Program, and previously the NEVI program. I say previously because the transportation funding bill, federal funding bill, we're in the last year of it. And that is a program that we're not budgeting currently in fiscal year 27 because we're pretty uncertain that it's going to continue beyond fiscal year 26. So we've zeroed that program out in fiscal year 27. Bustang, I'll note, is funded through, we talked about Bustang earlier. Bustang's funded through farebox revenue, faster transit revenue, FTA revenue, and the state share of MMOF. So all the dollars flowing to Bustang are statutorily limited to transit and multimodal purposes. I think you're probably picking up a theme here, statutorily limited. We have a lot of that in our budget development. That's where I said a lot of the work happens for us. The Innovative Mobility Program, that's actually an example of a program that is discretionary. It's a discretionary program where the commission chooses to fund that program on an annual basis, utilizing a combination of flexible state and federal funds. I'll note that while these programs total $100 million annually, we invest far more than that in multimodal projects. Again, this is just the dedicated multimodal programs we administer directly. A lot more is spent on multimodal grants and multimodal elements of capital construction program projects that show up in those other budget categories. Okay, I think I'm on the home stretch here. Let's see here. Finally, our last two categories. First, administration and operations. This totals $137 million for CDOT, or about 8% of our budget. The biggest elements here are staff salaries and benefits. IT and software licenses, light fleet, and common policies. So the central service costs that we have to pay to the Office of Information Technology, OIT, or to the AG's office. These budgets, we increase these budgets annually to reflect those common policy numbers that are given to us by the legislature. So that includes things like how much state employees are going to see, what type of wage increase state employees are going to see, changes to para contributions, again, fees to OIT and the AG's office. So really, we adjust these every year, but we adjust them for things we have very little control over. Mainly those common policies, increases to staff salaries, et cetera. The piece that we do control here is our staffing levels, right? We could choose not to fill positions, but otherwise, given our staffing levels, we don't have a lot of control over this element of the budget other than to track to what is coming out of the legislature through common policies. All right, and then the last budget category is sort of a catch-all. It's sort of everything that doesn't neatly fit elsewhere in the budget. That includes our debt service. That includes the allocations for the Senate Bill 267 COPs we talked about, as well as the building COPs we talked about today. The contingency reserve, so any funds that we set aside for reserve. It also includes our safety education and enforcement program, which are statutorily required state and federal safety programs. Our planning and research program, that's a lot of Darius's funding. That is also a mandatory federal program called the SPR program, or State Planning and Research Program. And then finally, the State Infrastructure Bank, which is a small amount, which is actually just the interest earnings on that fund that go back out into additional loans on an annual basis. All right, so let's go. The last few slides, I'm going to wrap up. Again, this month I really wasn't bringing you updates. It was more to kind of give you a little bit more context on overall revenues, and then a little bit more background on each of the individual categories of budget. Next month is when we will be back with some final changes to review, some updates. That'll include decision items. Those are requests for additional program or division region funding above base levels. Anything greater than $1 million requires commission approval. I'll note that given the limited availability of funds this year, we don't anticipate bringing you many significant decision items. So you'll see some that we approved internally because they're under $1 million threshold, and I can't remember off the top of my head. We might have one or two, but we're not going to have a lot, and we're not going to have a significant number of decision items this year. In addition to the decision items, let's go on to the next slide, please. The legislative session kicks off this week, so obviously we'll be monitoring that closely and bringing you any updates that might affect the budget. Since we approved the budget in March, it's unlikely anything will happen that we'd be reflecting in March, but I will say that we amend the budget in pretty much every year in July to catch it up with the legislative session. So we'll keep you informed, but most likely any legislative changes will wait and get amended into the budget in July. Let's see, what else? We will also we'll be making final changes to our administration and operations budget we'll have concluded our internal budget setting process. We'll also have final common policy decisions from the legislature, so we'll bring those final changes. That'll also drive some balancing adjustments to our contingency reserve, so we'll have some changes to that. Those are the primary changes that you'll be seeing from us last month. You will see in your packet there is a updated revenue forecast this quarter. It did not change significantly, so we aren't updating the budget based on that revenue forecast. So our revenue forecast generally is tracking pretty closely to what it was last quarter. All right, and I think this is my last slide, so I will wrap there. Again, we'll be back to workshop with you 2 more times, February and March, and then after the March workshop, I will be asking for your approval. So happy to answer any questions you might have or take any feedback you might have, but that concludes my presentation today.
Thank you, Jeff. I think I saw Cecil Gutierrez. Go ahead.
Jeff, thank you. And I appreciate your responsiveness, my concerns, and I want to make sure that you understand I was not being critical of you or your department. And what really what drove some of my comments over the last few months is that as these projects in the 10-year plan have come out, and maybe I don't know about the rest of my fellow commissioners, but I have received significant number of phone calls, emails, et cetera, that even text messages where there is a significant lack of understanding about how the monies can be used, and especially and significantly how those restricted funds of each of the enterprises can be used. And even more importantly, I had a conversation this morning with Piper Darlington, and I will use this as an example that I've had about 3 or 4 conversations in the last few days. When a citizen takes a look at the budget and they look at the bottom line that says, pardon me, unallocated funds, that total is viewed by the citizenry as available funds to be used, period.
Yep.
What is not understood by the citizen is that some of those funds that are unallocated or unassigned are already dedicated. In other words, using the CTIO budget, just to bring it down to a microcosm here, that $148 million that looks as unassigned balance is really not 148 million, because part of that is the whatever the millions are for the rail. There's is in that, because it's not all of it is allocated. The STEP program, which has significant restrictions as to what it can be used for, there's $12 million we're going to refund to CDOT based on our motion this morning. There's a whole significant layer here that is not understood, and so that's really my concern is if there's ways that we can make it more obvious, and it sounds like you are already looking at that, and I thank you very much for that. So appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the comments and suggestions. I think, we have a complicated budget. We also, as a transportation entities, are complicated. There are not one entity, there's 6 entities, and so definitely appreciate thoughts and perspective on how we can better communicate and make things easier to understand.
Yeah, that's good comments, Cecil, and the request will be a helpful one if you're able to reflect that. Just one little thing, I find myself wanting to see the state highway fund broken out. I know it's not truly a source of funds, it's what's allocated to it from the HUTF, am I correct? But still, I'd like to know how much of a portion of that pie it was. But
Sure, so I think what you were getting at is sort of like, from our revenues, how much of the revenues flow into the state highway fund? And yeah, and I could definitely get you that. It's so, to not go down too far down a rabbit hole, but we had looked at 73% of overall revenues are CDOT. Within CDOT, we have multiple different funds. An example is the MMOF. That's its own fund. One of the CDOT funds, the primary fund, but not the only one, is the state highway fund. So it can certainly get you that breakdown.
okay, thanks, Jeff. Any other questions or comments? I don't see anybody online. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a good update, really packed with information. Okay, we're in the home stretch. We've got the greenhouse gas emissions transportation report. Darius, I see Lib is here too.
Yes, thank you, Chair Cook. I'm going to ask for assistance from my Air and Climate Section Manager, Chris LaPlante, and Eric Sabina, my Deputy Director. As we go through this report, which is a kind of a second part to the Transportation Commission presentation from earlier, which is a report that's required under 2 CCR 60122, which is the greenhouse gas planning standard. I do want to caveat that this report is required for the non-MPO areas. The MPOs have to do their own report. I kind of already gave you a preview of what it's going to say, but we'll go through this in any case. So we'll go through some of this stuff in this presentation, and we'll bring this forward for adoption at a future month, which is predicated before we can adopt the plan. And I will also note that as part of the agreement that's been outlined within the rule and within our intergovernment agreements within with CDPHE and not with the MPOs, but the MPOs do sign that all of our information has been verified with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and that letter is in your packet on page 300. So we can go on to the next slide, please. So we'll start off with just giving a quick background about the planning standard, and if you will, like under that rule, it is section 8 of that rule. We'll talk a little bit about the 10-year plan, but I think we've covered that in detail a little bit earlier in the meeting, and we'll go a little bit into the modeling with our mitigation action plan, take a look at our compliance results, and then talk about next steps. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, it's this was a rule required under 2 CCR 601. It was established by the commission in 2001-2002. It sets out reduction levels as required for long-range transportation plans. There is reductions from a what we call a baseline for demonstrated compliance with these plans based on the highway network and the projects, what we call the action scenario. And it was one of the standards, or the standards is one of the strategies that was outlined with the administration's greenhouse gas reduction roadmap. The original one, what was called 1.0, there was a 2.0 which added additional strategies as well. And just for reference, CDOT models the areas outside the MPO areas. The MPO areas models their plans, which for the areas in green. So we model the areas, or excuse me, the MPOs do the areas in gray, we do the areas in green. So next slide, please. So when we take a look at the reduction levels, and I believe this is toward the beginning of section 8, these are the reduction levels that are required for each MPO and for CDOT, which we've highlighted in the purple bar towards the bottom which is in millions of metric tons. And compliance can be achieved through the project mix and what is called greenhouse gas mitigation measures as guided by Policy Directive 1610 that was adopted by the Transportation Commission shortly afterwards, I believe in later on in 2022, and I believe it was amended briefly in 2024. If you're looking at the past results, CDOT previously demonstrated compliance in the non-MPO areas through the GHG planning standard through initial update to the original 10-year plan that was with a report that was accepted through by the Transportation Commission in September 2022 with mitigation measures. And as I noted in the previous presentation, all of the MPOs have submitted a revised plan through the planning cycle that has a report that was accepted by the commission, except for the Pueblo. Their cycle has not come up yet since the rule was adopted, but that should be coming up shortly in the next couple of months. Next slide, please. So we talked a lot about projects and taking a look at the project mix that can help help elevate multimodal options, and we previewed a lot of that on there. And when we take a look in the non-MPO areas, we have 164 projects in the non-MPO areas of the state that focus on either active transportation elements or transit elements aligning with the sustainably increasing transportation goal. And just a couple of examples include like the Mountain Rail project, which was talked about in November. We have the support for regional busing, allocating $60 million to support the fleet replacement and continuing that, and the other 16 projects in non-MPO areas for outrider stops, mobility hubs, and maintenance facilities, 25 projects for local transit, and various projects supporting active transportation or including active transportation elements, sidewalks, intersections, and other multimodal improvements throughout the state. And those were covered extensively earlier today and back in November. And of course, we're happy to answer any questions about any of those projects, but we did talk a lot about those projects to help putting those, to help with providing choice in the next 10-year plan. And let's go to the next slide. And I think and I think this slide is going to be talking about how we are developing our model. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who's going to talk about how we coded our model a little bit quickly, and then he'll turn it over to Chris in a little bit.
Darius said quickly, that's the indicator that I'm not supposed to natter on about all sorts of boring technical matters. So, very briefly, we have a statewide travel model. The MPOs also have their models, as I think everyone's aware. And, a couple of the things, we're basically depicting what's going on in the state, doing a comparison between sort of no action scenarios into the future. What if we don't have the 10-year plan? What if we don't do some of these things? And then running the action plan as well, and looking at, then coding in things like, as it says here, mountain rail, front range passenger rail, other matters, comparing those two outcomes in terms of GHG and seeing if we hit the target. The main item I want to note at the bottom is that some of these parameter changes that are described here, we are using the same ones as we used when we went through this exercise in 2022 in our initial finding of compliance with the GHG standard. And in the interest of time, I won't go over a lot of these details, but always happy to answer questions if people have them. Oh, I have 2 more slides. Thanks. Again, just sort of emphasizing that we are using the standard tools in doing this modeling work. So we're using for the non-MPO area, the green area that Darius mentioned in one of the earlier slides, we're using the state's model. Again, want to emphasize that each of the MPOs does this exercise for themselves, and each of them uses their own model when they're doing this exercise in their areas. And we also use basically the latest available MOVES model, the EPA's GHG and other pollutants emissions model when we're doing this work as well. So we're just kind of keeping up with the standard tools. It's important to note that, things do change through time. There are always changes going on. We did some work, for example, with the APCD to update some estimates of fleet mix out there on the road. So how many trucks are there? How many passenger cars are there? So we're always, examining our latest data and making sure that we're up to date on that. We did go through a modest adjustment with the IAC, the Interagency Consultation Team, to slightly reduce the EV penetration rates we'd been assuming. So that's slightly lower than it was when we did this exercise in 2022, but not a big significant difference. The main target was that we decided to make it match up with what our finance folks had been assuming when they do their revenue forecasts. And I'll go into details on that if you'd like. And then finally, a pretty important one is the State Demographer's Office, which is in DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs. They update their forecasts of how big the state's going to be in future years, and they do that basically every year. So those are some things that we just have to track as time goes on. And so that also made a slight, made some noticeable effects on the travel model. Next slide. So if I'm doing 3, then I'll hit this one. So all of that stuff that, I'm hitting the bottom bullet here is the combined effects of a number of things that we changed in parameters, like the fleet mix and things like that, ended up making it slightly easier to hit the target, the GHG target, than when we did this in 2022. Particularly the DOLA's smaller expectations of the state we'll just go with 2050. So they are making, smaller forecasts of growth into the year 2050 than they did back in 2022 when we did this. And that means that the overall total of emissions is somewhat smaller. Nevertheless, we're still hitting 1.5 million metric tons. That's a 2030 number. The fleet mix numbers that I mentioned also changed. There are some sort of counterintuitive things that I'd be happy to go into in greater detail, but basically the changes meant that the VMT was a little dirtier. So each mile of driven by cars and trucks is emitting somewhat more VMT. When we have dirtier VMT to work with, all of our measures that reduce VMT are a little bit more effective because every mile that they reduces more emissions than it was doing back in 2022 when we did this. So when you sort of combine these two major effects here, the overall effect is slightly easier to hit the target than it was before. And I think that's my last slide.
There we go. So kind of bringing it all together here on the modeling side, and we just went over the kind of the project mix and the methods of modeling. This is really a summary slide on the model results. So first line again is our baseline plan modeling, and those are the emissions in million metric tons that we model in the baseline plan for each of the future horizon years. Second line is our updated plan and the model results for that. The key here is the difference between those two are represented in the red text. Those are the modeled emission reductions based on those two exercises. And as it shows here, we actually model compliance in 2030 and 2050. However, CDOT does not meet the total reduction in 2040 and has 46,000 metric tons of GHG mitigations needed. Next slide. So I'll just briefly go through the mitigations. These are detailed extensively in Appendix A if you're interested in seeing the calculations. This is a very quick summary table on this slide. We have four main categories that we're planning to achieve mitigations in, both land use, transit, medium and heavy duty electrification, and traffic operational strategies. So what I want to point out is that we have again, the summary here shows you the total of all those strategies in each of the 3 horizon years, the most critical of which is required by the rule where we need to achieve 46,000 metric tons. We do plan to exceed that in 2040, but the other years we do also intend to achieve mitigation measure outcomes as well. So next slide, please. So the first one on land use, I'll just touch on these each briefly. We are planning to support increases in residential density and moderate intensity transit-oriented development. Again, these are all methods that are prescribed in PD 1610, how we can take credit for these measures. This will be tracked at the moment based on rezonings in non-NPO areas. CDOT does not get to make land use change decisions as they are made at the local level, but our role is really to help fine tune those investments that will support local land use change. Next slide. On transit strategies, our goals are really focused on increasing revenue service miles. So we have a couple key areas that we're working on that. One is on the regional bus staying network. Another is returning Royal Transit service to levels that are consistent with pre-COVID, essentially. And then we are also taking advantage of the Clean Transit Enterprise new formula grant program in terms of enhancing and increasing local transit service. Next slide. Then our final 2 big bin category areas, medium and heavy duty electrification. We are fortunate to have the Clean Transit Enterprise, and we are tracking our ability to implement EV buses in place of diesel buses. And so our measure there, we are tracking how those grants are being issued and bringing those buses into service. And then some new strategies, well, some of which are new on the traffic operational strategies include supporting roundabout construction and traffic signal retiming. These are really tracked by the number of those projects that occur, really ultimately improving traffic flow and smooth traffic flow, as well as tracking the annual average daily traffic associated with those infrastructure elements. Next slide. So just want to kind of bring it all together here on our compliance demonstration. We have, kind of go over this table real quickly. The first line is what we showed on the previous slide, which are the GHG reductions achieved through modeling. We've broken apart the mitigation measures into 2 lines, just really for communication purposes. we want to show that 46,000 metric tons. It's mandatory. The third line is what we're calling our voluntary, going above and beyond what's required by the rule. And then when you sum those all together, we have in the line in red what our total GHG reductions are anticipated to be from this 10-year plan. And comparing those to each of the reduction requirements in the rule, we are demonstrating that we will achieve compliance. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Darius for next steps.
So as required under the rule, we do have to provide this to the Transportation Commission for review and acceptance prior to any type of adoption. Thus, we're having this workshop early now that we have workshopped all of the 10-year plan projects and have those available, and wanted to have that available for your review. And we'll provide the potential adoption through resolution and acceptance of this report at a future commission meeting. This will be adopted through resolution, as I mentioned. As I mentioned at the very beginning, this per the rule, this has been verified, all the technical data by the Air Pollution Control Division. The letter's on page 300 in your packet. And as always, we will provide annual reports on our mitigation action plan on April 1st, as required under the rule. And with that, happy to answer any questions members of the commission have.
Thank you to all involved. Any questions, Commissioner Jones?
Thank you for that great report. Loved reading all this stuff. So interesting. I just had a couple of things. One, I thought I read that the compliance in maybe 2040 was assumed build out and funding of mountain rail and front range passenger rail, and I assume busting. Is that true?
That is based off of the mitigation action plan, based off of the funding that's available from CTIO to go to local transit agencies and busting and so forth. So yes.
So front range passenger rail though would probably.
Not front range passenger rail, mountain rail.
Okay, so front range passenger rail.
No, because those are in MPO areas.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I read that correctly. We've had a lot of changes at the federal level. Most notably, I think for this ending of the federal EV tax credits, and then also recently announced, but most certainly to go forward, a rollback of the fuel economy standards. And I'm just curious whether or not that gets in the model. It sounds like the dirtier the VMT, the better for your compliance. So maybe that's all for the well, but I'm just curious whether or not you're trying to keep track of those changes, because they will probably impact us in Colorado, I would think.
So I think I'll let Eric answer on any further details, but yes, essentially we'll use the best data that we have available, and we've tried to align it with the forecast that we used for the revenue. But essentially, if the number of EVs go down, it makes it easier to achieve compliance with the standard. So if for example, the number of electric vehicles goes down and we have traditional vehicles in the fleet mix, then it makes it much easier to go through to achieve the standard on there. So, but we continually update the model, because we don't just use the model just for this exercise. We want to be able to use the model for various other pieces of traffic analysis throughout this. So Eric continually, well, not Eric himself, but Eric's team continually updates factors that goes into this model. In fact, they have been working on a travel survey in order to help identify how people's travel patterns continue to go through. And they're just finishing up that project right now to help increase the inputs in the model. And Eric, that was a long soliloquy on that answer, but I wanted to see if you wanted to add anything else to that.
I think as far as the GHG modeling went, Darius covered everything. I will just plug again the last thing he mentioned, which was we've been working for the last 5 years on the first statewide travel survey in Colorado. Typically, these things were done just at the individual MPO levels in past years. We did a front range version of this back in 2010 that just covered the front range MPOs. That was also the first one of those that happened. We just finished the first statewide one with a whole bunch of newer data in it, which would be interested if anyone wants to hear to talk about it some appropriate moment. And yeah, we're going to be using that as some really useful new data to understand a lot of new things like electric bicycles coming in, and micromobility, Uber and Lyft predominance, a whole bunch of other stuff that back in 2010 didn't exist really, and we didn't have any data for that.
Anybody else?
I have one other nitpicky one. If nobody else has one. I'm curious what land use changes you think are projecting for the non-MPO areas. You referenced House Bill 1313, but that applies to MPOs, not, you have to opt in if you're not an MPO in order for that to apply to you. So I guess I'm just curious, a lot of those changes, I think, are likely to happen in the MPO areas. So
You want to take that?
So could you tell me exactly what your question, like when you say, what are we projecting in terms of the actual acreage? Because that's.
So as I understood it, in order to reach compliance in 2040, you did a mitigation action plan that include in part land use changes.
Right.
And I was curious to understand, your slide actually referenced House Bill 1313, which was, increased TOD along rail corridor, not rail, transit corridors. And as I understand it, applied to MPO areas, but that was a map for a non-MPO. So I'm just
Right.
curious what, I want to get, tap into the enthusiasm for the changes that we're going to see in the non-MPO areas on land use. And I wanted to know what was included for that.
Yeah, so we are really going to be reliant on a lot of that supportive legislation, and you are correct in 1313, that is not explicit to the non-MPO areas, but they can voluntarily designate in those areas. And so, one of our hopes is, again, that through some of the efforts that CDOT's able to make in terms of, I think there's some stipulations that might be in Senate Bill 174 or 1313, but to really prioritize funding or grant funding, use, if they're meeting the neighborhood center concepts within the non-MPO areas, then CDOT can prioritize certain types of funding streams. I think there are about 8 of them that were identified in one of the bills to say, we will make that a priority if you are proceeding forth and volunteering to designate neighborhood centers in non-MPO areas. So that would be kind of more of a synergy there that CDOT can take advantage of, providing some incentive for those changes.
Interesting. Any other questions? I'm kind of piggybacking on that one, Chris. Are you able to track zoning changes? Do you actually have from the municipalities involved? Non-MPO, I understand, but still a daunting task.
This is still one of the major tasks that we've been trying to tackle. We have gone through some work to try to reach out, like literally to, I think it was about the top 45 large local, cities and locations to work directly with them to try to assess zoning changes. And it's proven incredibly difficult and resource intensive. So one thing I'll note is that we're hopeful that some of the legislation, which is going to have certain types of reporting requirements, particularly for neighborhood centers, that some of these reporting requirements in the legislation will help us advance the ability to gather information. And so it proves a challenge.
Thanks. Jerry?
Yeah, I just want to add on to that as though one of the change from last time is we don't have that as a, we met the standard in 2030, and we have some of the ones that are a little bit more easier to track, such as, the roundabouts. We have that all over in the 10-year plan. I think there's one Weld County Road, 52 and State Highway. All right, thank you. So there's one right there that we're able to take credit for outside of the MPO area. And we don't have any of those in the 2030 portion. So we have that in more of the out years and be able to continue to refine our process to be able to take a look at that, knowing that that's a little bit of a daunting that's not even a word. I apologize. It's a little bit more of a daunting challenge, and we continue to get better at that and take a look at that. In addition to all the excellent answer Chris gave.
Yeah, really interesting. Go ahead, Commissioner Marcano.
Thank you, Chair Cook. And I guess kind of continuing down this little rabbit hole, I'm curious how much outreach, if any, CDOT has done with the development community in the state. And the reason I ask is because a lot of municipalities, like, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but the ones that I have worked either for in my past life in the architectural industry, or even the city that I was a council member on, they don't really plan themselves anymore. They have like general guidance documents, but it's very ad hoc based off of who shows up, who has the money to develop. And then usually there's exceptions if they come across any, if they, have anything that they're not 100% in compliance with when it comes to like the UDO, for example. Have you engaged with the development community about maybe incentives and stuff to get the kind of sustainable growth that we would need to hit the targets in this plan?
We have not yet, but that's an excellent suggestion, Commissioner, and maybe we can talk offline on how we can continue to help with moving forward with the mitigation action plan so that way we're successful in getting towards those goals in 2040.
All right, appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? All right, at 4:47, we're a little bit late. Thank you all for your patience and getting through. And I want to remind all that we're meeting early tomorrow for breakfast, 7:30. So, 7:30, bright and early. Okay, we'll go ahead and call it a day. Thank you all.